Hi guys. Tonight we ease into the slow, crunching hush of a frontier snowstorm. You stand outside a small log cabin as the wind pulls at your coat and sprinkles powdered ice across your eyelashes. Everything is moving and nothing is moving at the same time. The world is white, the world is loud, and the world is cold enough that you probably will not survive this without shelter. At least, not for very long. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you want to make this a little cozier, go ahead and comment your location and the local time where you are listening. Now, dim the lights. You push the door inward and step onto creaking floorboards. The moment it closes behind you, the cabin absorbs you like a hollow wooden lung. The storm still roars outside, but in here the sound is muffled, softened by logs fitted with imperfect care. You feel the temperature shift only slightly. This is not warmth, it is simply less cold, but in frontier terms that counts as progress. The first thing you notice is the shadowy outline of the hearth. It is barely glowing, just a few embers resting in what looks like a cradle of blackened stone. You kneel beside it, breathing in its earthy scent. The air is chilly enough that every breath fogs in front of your face, drifting lazily before it disappears. Your fingers hover over the faint heat and you imagine all the pioneer families who crossed into nights like this one. No street lamps, no insulated walls, no thermostat, just timber, determination, and a kind of hope that feels almost reckless. A mainstream historical fact slips in, as you remember that by the early 1800s, many cabins were built from green logs that shrank as they dried, which created cracks that whistled with freezing wind. The walls around you were never meant to be perfect. They were meant to be enough. You brush your hand along the nearest log and feel its ridges. The textures are sharp, almost splintery. There is no varnish here, only the scent of sap and old smoke. Pioneers stuffed gaps with whatever they had on hand. Moss, mud, straw, animal hair. Anything to stop the cold from creeping in. You lean close and catch the faint mustiness of old packing material. It is not comforting, but it is familiar to anyone who has spent time in cabins older than memory. You set your pack down and try to picture how you would sleep through a night like this. The answer comes slowly, drifting up from the room itself. First, you would listen. Listen to the wind wrapping around the cabin like a restless creature. Listen to the snow clumping on the roof in lazy thuds. Listen to the timbers answering each gust with their own chorus of groans. Frontier sleepers had no choice but to accept the noises that accompanied them. You are learning the same lesson now. A quirky little detail emerges as you notice a strip of old hide nailed over a gap near the door. Some pioneers believed certain animal skins blocked not only drafts but also malevolent winter spirits. Whether you believe that or not, the hide moves just enough to let you know the storm is still searching for a way in. Historians still argue whether such superstitions were rooted in European folklore or improvised frontier creativity, but the line between the two has always been blurry. You walk deeper into the cabin, where shadows gather in the corners. The boards beneath you complain mildly but hold. Every sound is amplified because the space is so small. You imagine huddling here for warmth, settling into the kind of sleep that is not restful so much as strategic. If you drift too deeply, the fire dies. If the fire dies, the night becomes dangerous. Sleep becomes a negotiation with nature, one that must be continuously renewed. You take another slow breath. The cold air prickles your nostrils. It is not clean in the modern sense, but crisp and honest. Wood smoke clings to everything. You begin to understand why pioneers often carried that scent with them, long after winter ended. It settled into hair, clothing, bedding, and memory. Sometimes it feels almost like another presence in the room, a familiar companion that follows you through the dark. You crouch beside the hearth again and tug your gloves off. Your fingers ache instantly. You press them near the shrinking embers, coaxing the faint warmth like someone trying to wake a sleeping animal. Pioneers often saved a single glowing coal for morning so they would not need to start a fire from scratch. It makes you wonder how many times someone scraped through the ashes in a half-asleep haze, whispering a plea that at least one ember was still alive. You feel that plea echo quietly under your ribs. A sudden gust rattles the roof and sends a puff of snow dust swirling through a crack. It falls onto your sleeve, melting instantly. The storm outside is relentless. You feel small in comparison, but the smallness has a strange tranquility to it. When you know you cannot dominate nature, you start learning how to rest within it. That is the lesson the cabin is teaching you now. You study the bed frame against the far wall, little more than a wooden platform. The mattress is stuffed with dried grasses and feathers that poke through the fabric in stubborn little quills. It looks uncomfortable by modern standards, but pioneers often preferred this over thick feather beds because the grass is insulated better when temperatures dropped. You run your hand across the blanket. It is coarse, heavy, and smells faintly of wool and smoke. Everything inside this cabin has a scent that reminds you of the land outside. Even the shadows seem to smell like pine and frost. Another gust shakes the walls. Your shoulders relax because you are beginning to understand the rhythm. Storm, creak, silence, repeat. You let the sound lull you, the way early settlers let it shape their breathing. A strange comfort settles in. The cabin may be small and imperfect, but it is not fragile. It has survived many winters before this one. You ease yourself onto the bed, feeling the uneven stuffing shift beneath you. Your body sinks just enough to feel held, but not enough to forget the structure beneath. You try to imagine drifting into sleep with the storm still raging. It would not be peaceful. It would be intentional, the kind of sleep where you accept that the world outside is wild and unpredictable, yet you remain steady at its center. The fire pops gently. You hold on to that sound as your senses begin to soften. The cold still nips at your cheeks, but it no longer feels hostile, just present, just real. You close your eyes and listen again. Wind, wood, embers. Your breathing falls in line with the steady pulse of the storm. The night has begun. You open your eyes again, just enough to see the glow shifting across the hearth. The fire is still only a suggestion of warmth, a faint orange pulse buried beneath grey ash. You rise slowly, your joints stiff from the cold, and move toward it. This is the moment every pioneer knew well. The fragile window between comfort and discomfort, between a tolerable night and a dangerous one. You crouch close and feel the chilly stones beneath your knees. The storm growls outside, but in here the world is focused on a handful of embers. You reach for the fire iron resting beside the stones. Its metal is icy against your fingers. You tap the ash lightly until the embers reveal themselves like tiny eyes blinking awake. A thin ribbon of smoke curls upward, carrying the familiar scent of wood and soot. There is a reason the hearth was the heart of every cabin. A mainstream historical fact settles into your thoughts as you remember reading that most early log cabins used open hearths without proper dampers, which meant heat escaped easily but still provided the only reliable warmth. You pile a few thin twigs around the embers and blow gently. Your breath creates a soft whoosh that spreads heat across your cheeks. The twigs catch, snapping in tiny protests as flames lick upward. You add a thicker piece of wood, then another. Each one is precious, because pioneers measured firewood not in logs, but in hours of survival. A stack of wood was as valuable as stored grain, maybe even more so on nights like this. You sit back on your heels and let the warmth slowly reach you. It is not much, but it is enough to keep your fingers from stiffening. The light grows, illuminating the rough surfaces of the cabin. Shadows flicker across the walls in restless patterns. You can imagine how settlers often drifted off watching these same shifting shapes, letting them blend into dreams where animals prowled or spirits wandered. A quirky tidbit you recall is that some pioneers believed a fire that cracked loudly was speaking to them, offering warnings or blessings depending on the tone. You listen now, curious, but the fire speaks in a low, steady murmur. The wind slams against the cabin again. Snow hisses across the roof. You shiver instinctively even though the flames are beginning to build. You move your hands close, rubbing them slowly, absorbing whatever heat the fire is willing to share. You can feel the warmth radiating just far enough to thaw the tips of your fingers, but not far enough to reach your toes. Those remain numb inside your boots. You decide to pull another piece of wood from the small indoor stash. It is damp at one end, likely brought in too quickly from the storm before. You turn it over in your hands, feeling the rough grain, the weight of it. Historians still argue whether pioneers preferred to burn hardwoods at night for longevity or softwoods for quick heat. The answer probably changed with whatever the forest offered. Tonight, the wood you have burns unevenly but willingly enough. You ease it onto the flames. Smoke thickens, letting off a tangy scent that clings to the walls. A soft haze drifts through the cabin, making your eyes blink. For a moment, you imagine how many nights settlers spent coughing gently from smoke while pretending not to notice. Chimneys were often makeshift or poorly drafty. You inhale, feel the gritty edge of soot slide down your throat, and exhale slowly. You take a seat on the low stool near the hearth. The wood creaks beneath you. Your elbows rest on your knees, and you watch the flames climb in slow, determined spirals. You can almost sense the fire deciding whether to be generous tonight. The flames sway, gather strength, sway again. Little by little, warmth pushes into the cabin like a shy visitor testing the room. The storm continues pounding outside, but the fire offers a small victory. You can hear it cracking and shifting as it settles into a steady burn. That sound feels like reassurance, like a heartbeat returning to a tired body. You lean closer, letting the heat brush against your cheeks, and take in the dance of light on the uneven stones. Fire tending was a nightly ritual for every pioneer household. No one simply went to bed and let nature run its course. You smile a little at the thought. Sleep was earned, not expected. And tending the fire required patience, timing, and a kind of quiet optimism. You can feel that optimism now, warming you more than the flames themselves. You stand and stretch, feeling the warmth pool around the hearth area. It creates a kind of invisible boundary, a small zone where your body can remember what comfort feels like. Beyond that line, the cabin remains cold, the air biting and still. You move in and out of that warmth intentionally, trying to understand how settlers balance their nights. A few minutes by the fire, a few minutes back in bed, a few minutes bundling children tighter under blankets. Then back to the fire again because the logs burn too fast in weather like this. You place another carefully chosen log onto the flames. It settles with a heavy thump that sends sparks drifting upward. The scent grows richer, a mix of sap and smoke. It wraps around you in a way that feels oddly familiar even if you have never lived in a cabin like this. Maybe humans simply know the comfort of fire on an instinctual level. You take a deep breath and let your shoulders relax. Outside, the wind funnels through the trees, creating a low moan that rises and falls in eerie waves. Inside, the fire crackles, steady and rhythmic. The contrast is comforting. One sound is wild, the other tame. Together, they form a kind of lullaby that pioneers must have known by heart. You stare into the flames, letting your thoughts melt into their movement. The fire shifts from orange to gold, to deep red at its core. Each color pulses like a tiny world of its own. Sleepiness tugs at your eyes, but you know you cannot drift off just yet. Not until the fire climbs to a safer strength. For now, you breathe, you watch, you wait. The fire glows brighter, your hands warm, your chest loosens. The storm rages, but you feel grounded. The pioneers would recognize this moment. They lived it, night after night, storm after storm. You are simply borrowing it for a little while. You wake again to a sudden whistle of cold air slipping across the cabin floor. It glides along your ankles like a curious animal, then disappears as quickly as it arrived. You sit up slowly, rubbing your eyes, and notice the thin line of pale snow gathering beneath the wall. It is subtle, but unmistakable. The storm outside is testing every seam of the cabin, searching patiently for the smallest weakness. You step toward the wall and crouch, letting your hand hover over the faint draft. The cold brushes your skin like a whisper. Cabins like this one were never airtight. Historical records show clearly that early log homes were often built with logs that had irregular shapes, leaving spaces where wind could weave through during heavy storms. Pioneers sealed them as best they could, but nature always pushed back. You lean closer, pressing your palm flat until you can feel the delicate tremble of air seeping through. The logs are swollen with moisture from previous snows, their edges darkened by years of harsh winters. You straighten and trace the line of the wall with your fingertips. The texture is rough, splintered, alive with the story of seasons past. At one spot, the wood bows inward, creating a small hollow you had not noticed before. Inside the hollow is a plug of dried moss mixed with mud that has cracked like old pottery. A curious side fact pops up here. Some settlers in remote regions added animal fur or shredded bark into their chinking mix when storms intensified because these materials expanded slightly when damp, helping block troublesome gaps. The wind groans outside, and you feel the cabin give a small shiver in response. It is not dramatic, just a reminder that buildings made from stacked logs behave like living things. They shift, they breathe, they protest. You run your hand along the seam between two logs and imagine the countless repairs families performed during winters far colder than this one. You picture tired hands smoothing mud into cracks, pressing moss firmly with the base of a fist, hoping the makeshift layer would hold for one more night. A larger gust slams against the north wall. You hear snow spraying the outer timbers in quick metallic taps, A flurry of white dust sifts down from the ceiling beams, falling onto your shoulder like tiny stars. It tickles your collarbone and melts instantly from your warmth. That is how easily the outside world leaks in. One loose shingle, one aging log, one overlooked crack, and the storm finds you. Experts remain divided over the best traditional method for sealing a log cabin. Some argue that a thick clay mixture was most reliable in deep winter because it dried hard as stone. Others insist that softer materials like moss or straw created better insulation by trapping pockets of warm air. The truth is probably somewhere in between, shaped by local resources and desperate improvisation. You glance at the wall again and can almost feel the decisions layered in each patch. You reach for a small wooden wedge sitting on the floor near the door. It looks like something a child might use in a simple craft project, but here it carries a far more serious purpose. You tap it gently into the gap with the heel of your hand. The wood squeaks softly and settles. The draft lessens, replaced by the quiet sigh of the cabin adjusting to the change. You blow warm air into your cupped hands and hold them near the wall again. The cold is still there, but softer now, more diffused. You step back and take in the larger shape of the room. The fire casts a low, sleepy glow that sketches the walls in amber. The dance of light makes the gaps between logs seem deeper, darker, almost like the cabin has ribs that expand with each gust. The storm outside scratches at the edges of your hearing, a steady hum of swirling snow and restless wind. Inside, there is only the gentle crackle of the fire and the quiet rhythm of your breath. You move toward a second draft near the window. The pane is not glass, at least not in the way you know glass. It is a thin sheet made from animal horns scraped until translucent. The texture is uneven and wavy, giving the light a soft, watery look. This was common in early frontier homes, especially in regions where obtaining glass was expensive or impossible. You place your palm against it. The surface feels cool and slightly pliable, like old leather. Another unusual frontier custom emerges in your memory. Some settlers applied layers of grease or tallow onto horn windows during winter. This helped seal small fractures and also provided a faint sheen that diffused incoming light more evenly. You can almost imagine someone smearing warm grease onto this pane just before the storm, hoping the layer would last long enough for daylight to return. You kneel near the base of the window frame and feel a thin blast of air slipping through. This one is sharper, more determined. You take a strip of cloth from your pack and wedge it into the seam. The cloth muffles the draft slightly, though you know it will never vanish entirely. The walls, the roof, the window frames, even the floorboards all contain thin pathways for cold. The goal was never perfection. It was endurance. You stand again and stretch your shoulders. The cabin breathes with you, its wood expanding and contracting in small sighs. You can hear the faint clicking of timber fibers shifting with the temperature. You feel strangely connected to it, as if the structure itself recognizes your presence and adjusts subtly to accommodate your movements. You inhale the smell of old bark, soot, and packed earth. The air is dense with the sense of human survival. You return to the hearth, warming your hands again. The fire now burns steadily, sending soft waves of comfort into the room. You let your gaze drift across the floorboards, where narrow lines of pale snow show the draft paths. They glimmer faintly in the firelight before melting. You imagine a pioneer mother or father watching the same phenomenon decades ago, making small mental notes on where repairs needed reinforcing come morning. Your eyes wander to the ceiling beams. They are thick, uneven, and darkened with time. You spot a tiny icicle forming at the joint where roof meets wall. It hangs like a fragile ornament, trembling with each new gust. You tilt your head, studying it with mild fascination. It will melt soon, but it is a perfect reminder of how thin the line is between outdoors and indoors in a cabin like this. Nature always has one finger inside. You lean back on your heels and listen. The storm howls, the cabin creaks, the fire whispers. Together they form a conversation, one that pioneers knew by heart. You hear the rhythm, the push and pull of pressure against timber, the subtle groan of warming logs, the thrum of wind squeezing through hairline cracks. It is a strange harmony, but it calms you. You sit on the edge of the bed again, feeling the chill of the mattress rise into your legs. The blanket lies rumpled at your feet. You pull it over your lap and sink back, letting the fire's glow reflect in your eyes. The drafts still slip around the room, tracing your cheeks like cold fingers, but now they feel almost gentle, like the cabin's oldest ghosts checking to see if you are still awake. You breathe slowly. You feel the cold. You hear the storm, and you accept that the frontier way of sleeping was not about escaping nature. It was about resting inside it. You rise from the bed again, stretching your stiff limbs as the cold tiptoes up your spine. The fire behind you pops softly, offering a small comfort, but your attention drifts toward the far corner, where the bedding materials wait in a haphazard pile. You move toward them slowly, feeling the cabin floor groan beneath your steps. The air is colder back here, untouched by the hearth's glow. This is where pioneers shaped their nests for the night, arranging whatever materials they had to create something that resembled rest. You kneel beside the bedding and lift the top blanket. It is heavy and slightly damp at the edges, infused with the combined scent of wool, smoke, and human life. Historical sources widely agree that many pioneer mattresses were stuffed with straw, dried grasses, leaves, or a mix of whatever plant matter could be collected before winter truly set in. You press your palm into the mattress beneath the blanket and feel the uneven lumps. Some are soft enough to cradle your hand. Others poke back with sharp persistence. You settle onto the edge, sinking into the stuffing with tentative curiosity. The dried grasses make a soft rustling sound beneath you, a reminder of autumn fields long gone. If you shift too quickly, the stalks prickle your skin. Comfort was always relative out here. Softness was a luxury, and warmth was the only true measure that mattered during nights like this. You lean back slightly and lift a corner of the ticking fabric that covers the mattress. Inside, the stuffing is a mottled mixture of faded gold and pale brown. A curious detail surfaces in your mind. Some frontier families secretly preferred hay from certain plants because they believed it smelled sweeter and drove away insects during summer months. In winter, the scent was simply a faint memory of greener days. You breathe it in now, noticing the subtle earthy sweetness buried beneath the smoky cabin air. Your fingers run across the stitching. The seams are clumsy but determined, likely patched over many seasons. The thread is thick, uneven, and tough. Someone's hands worked hard on this, probably late at night by the fire when chores were finally done. You imagine a settler mother or father sewing by flickering flame, hoping the mattress would hold together through just one more winter. You lift the blanket again and fold it across your lap. Its weight settles around you like a protective shield. It scratches a little at your wrists, but the warmth it promises outweighs the irritation. Another layer lies beneath it, even coarser, probably made from rough, homespun cloth. Some families wove their own blankets, while others bartered with neighbors or traders. Supplies were rarely abundant, and every piece of bedding told a story of labor, trade, or desperation. You stretch out your legs and let your feet sink into the grasses inside the mattress. They bend reluctantly under your weight. The feeling is strange if you are used to modern beds. There is structure, but not softness. Warmth, but not comfort. As you shift your position, the stuffing murmurs beneath you like a quiet forest floor. If you close your eyes, you can almost imagine lying in a meadow in late summer, except the air biting your cheeks keeps you firmly rooted in winter. A striking image crosses your mind. Some frontier families flipped their mattresses every week or so because the grasses would break down, flatten, and sometimes mold if left in the same position too long. You picture a pioneer lifting the entire mattress, shaking it out vigorously while cold air nipped at their fingers. Maintaining bedding was as essential to survival as tending the fire. You pull the blankets tighter around your shoulders. The cabin air feels sharper now, filled with the restless hum of wind slipping through the walls. The mattress shifts, and you feel one stiff reed poke your hip. You move again, adjusting, learning the subtle dance of settling into discomfort so it becomes tolerable. That was the true skill pioneers developed. They learned how to relax inside imperfection. Your gaze drifts toward the small shelf above the bed. On it lies a bundle of cloth, folded neatly. You take it down and unfold it carefully. Inside is a spare layer of padding made from stitched-together scraps of wool clothing. Researchers often note that settlers repurposed torn garments into sleeping materials, believing it added just enough insulation to make a difference on bitter nights. You rub the fabric between your fingers. It is soft in some places and coarse in others. Patched so many times it resembles a quilt made of mismatched memories. You lay the padding across the mattress and sit on it. The difference is subtle but noticeable. A touch more warmth, a hint more softness. You imagine how families treasured even these small improvements. Winter sleep was a negotiation between cold air and human resourcefulness. Nothing was wasted. Everything had potential use. You run your fingers through your hair and glance at the ceiling beams again. A small dusting of frost glimmers faintly where the roof slopes downward. If someone slept directly beneath that beam, melted snow would occasionally drip in the night. To avoid that, settlers often angled their beds slightly or placed them along the warmer wall near the hearth. You can see why this bed sits right where it does, close enough to catch heat, far enough to avoid stray sparks or smoke. There is a point of disagreement among historical researchers regarding how often families replaced their mattress stuffing. Some claim it was done seasonally because rodents frequently nested inside the warm grasses. Others insist that families redid the stuffing far less often because gathering new materials in winter was nearly impossible. You lean back onto the bedding and feel the uneven texture beneath your shoulders. Whatever schedule this family followed, they made do with what they had. You tuck your legs under the blanket and lie down fully now. The mattress gives beneath your weight, shifting in soft crackles. Your body heat begins to seep into the grasses, making them respond with a faint warmth. Your cheek rests on the coarse fabric of the pillow, which is filled with feather down that has poked through the cloth in several stubborn points. It is not comfortable in the modern sense, but there is something grounding about it. You feel connected to the simple reality of the materials, to the land outside that provided them, to the people who slept here before you. The fire flickers softly along the wall, painting long strokes of gold across the room. You watch the shadows stretch across the ceiling, bending over the beams where frost lies like spilled silver. The storm outside continues its relentless pounding, but the bed beneath you holds steady. You close your eyes for a moment and let your breathing slow. You feel the mattress rise and fall with your breaths, the grasses shifting like quiet waves. The blankets gather around your shoulders, their weight reassuring in the cold. The cabin creaks softly, adjusting itself to the wind. You are beginning to understand how pioneers found rest in such conditions, not by fighting the cold, but by layering themselves against it with whatever nature and hard work provided. You open your eyes again, listening to the combined sounds of storm, fire, and shifting bedding. The night moves around you in gentle pulses. You exhale slowly, letting the warmth from your body sink deeper into the rough materials beneath you. This is how frontier sleep began. Not in comfort, but in acceptance. You sit up slowly, pulling the blanket away from your chest as the cabin air nips at your skin again. Your breath fogs gently in the dim light, drifting upward like a little wandering ghost. The fire is still alive, glowing with a quiet confidence that reassures you the night has not won just yet. But as you glance at the wide bed, you remember something essential about frontier nights. Sleep was rarely solitary. It was shared, layered, bundled, sometimes uncomfortably close, but absolutely necessary. You shift to the edge of the mattress and run your hand across the broad surface. The grasses inside whisper faintly as your fingers move. Families often slept shoulder to shoulder here, sometimes 3 or 4 in a row if the night grew dangerously cold. One widely accepted detail from early frontier accounts is that human warmth was the most dependable heat source when storms made fire unpredictable. If one person moved, everyone else felt it. If one person shivered, the reaction rippled down the line. You settle back onto the mattress and imagine bodies arranged in careful patterns. Children nestled closest to the fire, where their smaller forms could gather heat more efficiently. Adults positioned along the outer edges to act as living windblocks. Extra blankets draped over the entire group like a protective shell. You breathe in the lingering scent within the bedding. It is a blend of wool, smoke, faint sweat, and the shared life of a family that relied on each other to survive winter nights. You slip your hand under the blankets and feel how the warmth collects under the layers. It grows slowly at first, then rises into a soft pocket of heat that feels almost comforting. You picture a mother settling down beside her children, pulling them close, whispering small reassurances while the storm clawed at the cabin walls. You imagine a father lying awake at the edge of the bed, making sure no draft reached the youngsters. Sleep was a family chore here, not a private event. You shift again, curling your knees slightly as if making room for someone beside you. The bed responds with a subtle creak. A curious old custom surfaces in your memory. Some settlers placed heated stones or warmed bricks between blankets before everyone crawled into bed. The stones radiated just enough heat to keep toes from freezing. If one slipped out or cracked during the night, the sound could wake the entire cabin. You reach over and tap the place near your hip, where such a stone would sit. The idea makes sense. Cold feet can ruin even the bravest sleeper's night. You pull the blankets higher, letting them fall heavily across your shoulders. Their combined weight presses you down in a steady, reassuring way. For a moment you feel held by the same routine countless families once practiced. You shift your gaze to the doorway. A small draft moves through the room like a wandering ribbon of cold. You imagine how, on the coldest nights, families sometimes invited neighbors or travelers into their cabins, simply because extra bodies meant extra warmth. Pride bowed to survival. You can almost hear the soft murmurs as someone quietly lifted the latch in the middle of a storm and ushered in a shivering figure. Doors rarely stayed locked during winter. Warmth was a shared resource. As you settle deeper into the bedding, another point of disagreement among researchers comes to mind. Some historians insist that families slept in tight clusters every winter night, regardless of storm strength. Others believe these group arrangements were reserved for the harshest conditions, when temperatures threatened to reach deadly lows. Without diaries from every household, no firm answer exists, but both possibilities feel believable as you lie here sensing the cold pressing in on all sides. You slide your hand across the mattress again, feeling the uneven terrain beneath the blankets. You imagine how difficult it must have been for a large family to sleep without anyone tossing and turning. Every movement caused a ripple. Every cough echoed. Every shift of weight made the grasses inside the mattress rustle loudly. Still, closeness was not a nuisance. It was a necessity. You pull one blanket corner toward you and study its weave. The thick wool fibers catch the firelight in tiny glints. Someone repaired a section near the edge, stitching in a patch of mismatched fabric. You picture the needle passing through cloth by firelight, guided by tired fingers determined to keep the family warm. A sense of gratefulness fills you. Even though the blanket does not belong to you, it is heavy with purpose. You lie down fully now, resting your head on the pillow once more. The feathers shift beneath your weight, rustling softly. You pull the blanket across your chest and imagine 2 or 3 small bodies pressed close against your side, drifting into sleep with quiet breaths. Warmth would build slowly between you, rising like a shared heartbeat. Even now, alone, you can feel how the blankets trap the heat you exhale, forming a small pocket of comfort around your face. The storm rattles the window, and a soft whistle creeps through the gap near the frame. The air touches your cheek like a cold fingertip. You tuck yourself deeper under the covers, mimicking the instinctive movements of families who huddled together whenever a cold draft pierced their careful arrangements. The bed becomes a living thing, shifting and adjusting with every inhale and exhale. You look across the cabin once more, noticing how the shadows stretch across the opposite wall. The fire reflects off the wooden timbers in soft ripples. The cabin settles again, giving a small groan that sounds almost like a tired sigh. You breathe deeply, letting the warm air beneath the blankets fill your lungs. Shared warmth, shared breath, shared survival. Your eyelids grow heavy as the fire hums quietly behind you. You understand now that sleeping through a frontier snowstorm required more than blankets, more than fire, more than grit. It required closeness, human warmth woven into the rhythm of the night. You exhale slowly, letting that warmth cradle you, even if only imagined. This is how pioneers drifted into sleep. Not alone, but together. You rise again from the bed, rolling your shoulders to loosen the stiffness that settled there during the last stretch of quiet. The storm is still clawing at the cabin walls, but the fire has found a steady rhythm. You breathe in its warmth for a moment before turning toward the stalls at the back of the cabin. The space is narrow, built more like an alcove than a proper room, but the scent drifting from it is unmistakable. Straw, animal musk, and the faint sweetness of stored feed. You step closer, feeling the temperature shift with every move. Pioneers often relied on animal heat just as they relied on fire. It was a practical decision born from necessity rather than preference. One commonly mentioned detail in frontier journals is that settlers frequently kept livestock in attached lean-tos or even inside the same structure during winter storms to prevent them from freezing. You run your hand along the wooden partition, separating this small stall from the main room. The timber is warm to the touch compared to the outer walls. Something living on the other side is breathing gentle puffs of heat into the space. You press your ear to the boards and hear a slow rustling, followed by a patient exhale that fogs faintly through the gaps. A cow, or perhaps a hardy frontier pony, rests there, shifting its weight in a sleepy rhythm. The animals carried the smell of the outdoors, but they carried warmth too, soaked deep into their thick winter coats. You lift the latch and peek through the narrow opening. A pair of dark eyes glint softly in the low light. The animal blinks once, slow and unconcerned. You close the latch gently so as not to disturb it. You take a step back and breathe. The air feels warmer here, almost as if the walls themselves remember sunshine from earlier months. A peculiar historical note lingers in your mind. Some settlers believed that animals offered not just warmth but also emotional stability during storms, claiming their steady breathing soothed anxious children. It sounds charming, perhaps a bit sentimental, but as you stand here, you understand how the presence of another living creature might steady the heart. A soft scraping sound pulls your attention downward. A chicken, ruffled and half asleep, hops lightly atop a straw-filled crate near the stall entrance. Its feathers puff out in a defensive ball against the cold. You crouch and hold your palm outward, letting it decide whether to approach. It merely blinks at you, settling its head under one wing. The faint heat radiating from its small body surprises you. Even the smallest creatures contributed to the overall warmth of a frontier household. You rise again and brush straw from your knees. Your breath creates pale clouds in the air, but the cold is less sharp here than beside the door or window. You glance along the floor, noticing how straw has worked its way into cracks and corners. Settlers often spread it deliberately to help insulate the floor or to cover drafty gaps between the boards. The straw crunches softly beneath your boots as you shift position. Your attention returns to the wooden partition. It is built from mismatched planks, some smooth and freshly cut, others older and weathered with knots and dark stains. You run your fingers across the edges. A curious offbeat detail surfaces in your thoughts. Some families hung quilts or old coats along the stall wall to create a sort of extra insulating barrier. It trapped warm air from both animals and people, forming a crude but effective microclimate. You study the wall and imagine a faded quilt hanging there long ago, its colors muted by smoke and time. A gust of wind slams into the cabin suddenly, rattling the door and sending a quick jolt of cold air skittering across the floor. You brace yourself instinctively. The livestock behind the partition reacts with a low, groaning shift of weight. You listen to the faint clink of a chain or harness settle back into place. The presence of the animals somehow makes the cabin feel sturdier, as if their quiet endurance strengthens the home itself. There is ongoing scholarly discussion about whether animals inside the cabin posed more risk than benefit. Some researchers argue that the added heat far outweighed any inconvenience, while others insist the smell, noise, and potential disease made the practice undesirable, except in emergencies. You lean against the partition and consider both sides. The air in this corner is certainly richer with scent, but your fingertips remain warmer here than anywhere else in the room. On a night like this, practicality would have won the argument. You step closer to the stall again and place your palm against the wood. You feel a gentle vibration as the animal shifts. It becomes a strange kind of communication, one that requires no language, just closeness, warmth, and survival. You picture a pioneer child sleeping on a trundle bed near this partition, soothed by the soft sounds of animals breathing. That child would wake in the morning to warm straw beneath their feet, warmed not by the hearth, but by the life resting only inches away. You walk toward the corner of the stall and notice a small wooden bucket with pieces of dried grain scattered inside. You pick up a handful, letting the kernels roll across your palm. Their scent is faint but still sweet. Feeding the animals during storms was essential. A hungry cow or panicked horse could thrash, break boards, or injure itself. You imagine a parent waking several times each night, checking on livestock to ensure both their safety and the family's warmth. You turn your gaze upward. The roof beams above this stall are lower, closer together, and covered with layers of thatch and bark. They trap warm air effectively. You place your hand against one of the beams. It feels slightly warmer than the beams near the front of the cabin. The difference is subtle, but real. You exhale and watch the warm air linger a moment before dissolving in the dim light. You walk slowly back toward the hearth, absorbing the mixture of animal scent and wood smoke in each breath. The warmth fades gradually as you step away from the stall. Your hands grow colder, your nose prickles. The contrast reminds you how vital every bit of warmth was to frontier life. The animals were not just sources of food and labor, they were part of the winter fight for comfort. Near the fire again, you turn and glance back at the stall alcove. The dim shapes of animals resting there make the cabin feel less empty, less exposed. You imagine how families might whisper soft thanks for the warmth their animals provided, even if the smell and noise sometimes tested their patience. You sit on the low stool by the fire and pull a blanket around your shoulders. The glow touches your face, but the memory of that shared warmth lingers even stronger. You close your eyes and listen. The animal exhales behind the partition. The fire hums beside you. The wind snarls outside. The sounds merge into a slow, grounding rhythm. You feel the warmth from the hearth mixing with the warmth from the animals, creating an envelope of survival. You steady your breathing, letting those layered heat sources settle around you like an invisible quilt. The pioneers did not rely on one thing for warmth. They relied on everything: fire, blankets, bodies, animals, even hope. You breathe deeply, letting that truth settle into your bones. The warmth is not perfect, but it is enough. You shift closer to the fire again, stretching your fingers toward its steady glow. The warmth reaches you, but only halfway. Your back still feels chilled, and your toes throb inside your boots. You rub your arms slowly, letting the cabin's dim light settle across your face. The question rises in your mind as naturally as the wind rattling the door. Did pioneers sleep fully clothed during nights like this, or did they peel off layers before crawling under the blankets? It sounds simple, but as with most frontier habits, the answer was shaped by necessity, tradition, and personal stubbornness. You rise from your stool and step toward your pile of clothing near the bed. Every garment here tells a story of survival. Heavy wool shirts stiff from smoke, linen underlayers scratched by rough washing, buckskin trousers worn shiny at the knees. You gather one shirt in your hands, feeling the texture. It is cold now, but you know it would warm quickly beneath your blankets. Many rural accounts from the era mention that settlers often kept at least some clothing on through winter nights, especially during storms, because removing them meant losing precious, accumulated body heat. You hold the shirt to your chest and picture a family preparing for bed. A father shrugging off only his outer coat while keeping on his woolen layers. A mother loosening her stays but keeping her chemise and skirts to protect her from drafts. Children sliding into bed, still wearing their stockings to keep their toes from aching in the cold. You smooth the fabric with your thumbs and imagine how scratchy it must have felt when damp, yet how protective it became during deep winter. You place the shirt down and examine the boots near the hearth. Their leather is cracked and darkened from years of cold weather. Some people slept with their boots beside the bed, others kept them on if the cabin was severely cold. There is an unusual historical detail that surfaces here. A few frontier travelers reportedly slept with warm ashes wrapped in cloth, placed at their feet inside their boots, hoping to keep their toes from numbness. The practice was not common, but it hints at just how inventive people became when the temperature dropped. You slip your fingers under your collar and tug it looser. The cabin air is cold enough that removing too many layers feels risky. You breathe deeply and exhale a slow stream of mist. The blankets tempt you, promising warmth if you dive beneath them, but the cold air beyond their edges makes you hesitate. Your body understands the dilemma instinctively: shed layers and risk chills, or keep them on and sleep less comfortably but more safely. You sit again on the bed, listening to the storm testing every gap in the wall. One strong gust makes the window shudder, sending a faint tremor through the cabin. You pull your blanket around your shoulders again, tucking it close under your chin. Some researchers point out that frontier sleepers often found that keeping too many layers on made the blankets less effective, trapping cold air pockets between fabrics. Others argue the opposite, insisting that full clothing created an insulating barrier. No modern consensus exists. You smile at the thought of experts centuries later, still trying to parse the habits of people who probably made decisions based on whatever felt tolerable in the moment. You run your hand over the blanket's surface. The wool leaves faint impressions on your skin. It is rough, but familiar, like something you've known in dreams. You lift the edge and slide your legs beneath it, feeling the gradual warmth build in the space around you. Clothing or not, the blankets do much of the work. Their weight alone anchors your body and tells your nerves it is safe to settle for a while. You pull your knees close and curl your toes. Movement helps restore a bit of heat. You picture a child doing the same under the covers, wiggling their legs to shake off the cold before settling into a stillness shaped by exhaustion. You imagine siblings elbowing each other for space, tugging blankets greedily over themselves, kicking off straw or feathers. Sleep was rarely peaceful here, but it came eventually, even if it came slowly. You look toward the door again. The faint draft, sliding across the floor, makes your ankles twitch. You tuck your legs deeper under the covers and pull the wool up to your shoulders. It creates a cocoon of warm breath and soft darkness. You lift your hands and press them against your chest, feeling the heat building beneath your underlayers. Whether fully clothed or half undressed, pioneers did what you are doing now, balancing warmth and comfort within the rules nature allowed. As you settle deeper, you take in the layered scents of the bedding: wool, steamed breath, smoke, and the earthy undertone of dried grasses below. These smells formed the backdrop of frontier nights. Clothing simply carried those scents closer to the skin. Some families likely slept dressed out of habit, others out of fear of sudden emergencies. If a fire dimmed or a predator approached or snow blocked the door overnight, being dressed could save precious minutes. A small point of debate appears in your thoughts. Certain diaries from northern settlements hint that people occasionally slept nude under heavy blankets because they believed their body heat stayed more concentrated. Meanwhile, other regions condemned the practice as unhealthy or impractical. The truth probably shifted with geography, culture, and the thickness of available bedding. You adjust the blanket over your shoulder and imagine the range of choices made in similar cabins across the frontier. Your gaze drifts to the fire, now a steady red glow. The warmth feels distant from the bed, but the cabin has settled into its own gentle rhythm. Wind, wood, fire, breath, all of it flowing together like a slow chant. You lean back into the mattress, letting the grains beneath whisper faintly as they adjust to your shape. You loosen your collar further and tuck your hands beneath the blankets. Your clothing cracks softly as the fabric warms. For a moment, you feel the tension leave your shoulders. You begin to understand why settlers debated these nighttime habits so passionately. It was not about luxury. It was about survival disguised as routine. You let your breathing slow, letting your layers hold in the heat you've gathered. The storm snarls one final time, then retreats slightly, leaving behind a cold hush. You close your eyes, cocooned in wool and warmth, knowing that pioneers weighed these same choices every night of winter. What to keep on, what to take off, what might keep them alive until dawn. You stand once more, easing yourself out from beneath the blankets as the cold air reaches up to greet your skin. It presses against you like a patient reminder that the storm has not softened, only paused. You wrap your arms across your chest and walk slowly toward the far wall of the cabin, where the logs stack in uneven layers. This is where the real work of insulation shows itself, where every crack reveals a story of struggle, patchwork, and frontier ingenuity. You press your palm flat against the log. The surface feels firm, cold, and rough, with ridges shaped by years of wind and rain. Historical accounts make it clear that early American cabins relied heavily on chinking, a mixture of mud, clay, grass, straw, and anything else settlers could pack between the logs. You crouch down and run your fingertips along one of these filled seams. Your hand meets stiff, dried mud that flakes slightly beneath your touch. A subtle earthy scent rises, reminding you of riverbanks and clay baked by summer sun. You lean in closer, noticing small pockets of moss wedged deeper inside the crevices. A faint green glimmer remains here and there, even though the moss has long since dried. A curious observation from old frontier letters resurfaces in your memory. Families often gathered moss in late autumn, not just for warmth but also because it was easier to handle than heavy clay in freezing weather. They stuffed it into the cracks with blunt sticks or even the ends of spoons, pressing and shaping it until it formed a rudimentary shield against the wind. You stand and stretch, feeling the tension in your shoulders ease slightly. The wind outside claws at the cabin again, and you feel the pressure shift through the walls like a slow, shuddering pulse. It makes you step closer to another seam, where the chinking has cracked completely. Cold air slips through and brushes the back of your hand. You inhale sharply at the sudden chill. You reach for a small bundle of materials resting on a nearby stool. Someone has gathered dried grass and a handful of soft bark shavings, ready for patchwork. You take a piece of grass, roll it between your fingers, and marvel at how something so delicate could help hold back winter. There is an offbeat historical note you recall here. Some settlers mixed animal dung with the mud, creating a stronger material when dried. The thought makes you wrinkle your nose slightly, but you cannot deny the practicality. Survival often demanded choices far removed from comfort. You stuff a bit of grass into the crack, using your thumb to wedge it deeper. The grass snaps softly, shifting into place. You tap it a few times until the draft weakens. The process feels strangely grounding. It is as if you are participating in the same quiet rituals families performed countless times throughout the harsh months. There were no elegant tools, no store-bought solutions, just whatever the land offered. You step back and observe how the firelight paints the wall in warm amber strokes. The logs glow in uneven patterns, their textures standing out like layers of history carved into wood. Some parts bulge outward, others dip inward. No two logs are the same. That irregularity was part of the challenge. Pioneers shaped their insulation around imperfections, rather than expecting perfection from their homes. You move toward the corner, where a strip of hide hangs loosely over a wider gap. The hide is stiff, worn, and patched in places. You lift it gently. Behind it, the wind whistles through a hole the size of your palm. You let your hand hover there, feeling the icy breath push against your skin. This opening would have frozen the feet of anyone sleeping nearby. You lower the hide back into place and feel the temperature soften immediately. You remember reading that some settlers believed hides from certain animals blocked cold more effectively because they retained natural oils. They also hung them over doors and windows during storms, creating makeshift curtains that sealed in heat. The hide in your hand smells faintly of smoke and old leather. It carries the weight of many winters. You adjust the hide, tucking its edges more firmly under a wooden peg. The draft weakens. Warm air from the hearth slowly pushes into the space, reclaiming it inch by inch. Your fingers throb gently from the cold, but you feel a sense of accomplishment. These adjustments mattered. Even the smallest repair could shift the balance of comfort during a storm. You stand again and walk toward the window. The pane, made from horn or oiled cloth, quivers faintly in the wind. You feel a thin line of cold air sneaking through its edges. You press your hand along the frame, noticing where the wood has shrunk over time. The natural expansion and contraction of logs throughout the seasons created new problems each year. It was a living structure, never truly finished. A point of disagreement among researchers returns to your thoughts. Some argue that cabins insulated with moss and clay held warmth better than those that relied more heavily on animal hides and cloth. Others believe it depended entirely on the moisture levels of the materials, with drier mixtures performing best. Standing here with your hand resting on the chinking, you suspect the answer varied wildly from cabin to cabin, storm to storm, and family to family. You gather another handful of grass from the stool and push it into the weakest corner by the window. The scent of dried vegetation fills the air for a moment. You inhale deeply, taking in the mixture of earth, smoke, and winter. You smooth the grass with the back of your hand, pressing firmly until the draft fades into a whisper. You turn your attention upward, where the ceiling meets the outer wall. Frost clings to the beams in delicate patterns, glittering softly in the firelight. You reach up and touch one of the beams. It feels cold, but slightly warmer than the logs near the door. Warm air rises, even in a cabin full of drafts. You follow that warmth in your mind, imagining how families often hung extra cloth or blankets across beams to trap heat near the sleeping area. You sit on the bed again and pull the blanket across your lap. You feel the mattress shift beneath you, the grasses whispering faintly with your weight. The fire crackles warmly at your side. The insulation repairs you just made slow the cold enough for you to settle again. You listen closely. The wind still pushes against the cabin, but the room feels more secure. Fewer drafts glide across your ankles. The cold no longer sneaks up your sleeves as sharply. You exhale, letting the warmth collect in your chest and spread through your limbs. This is what insulation meant on the frontier. It was never a perfect barrier, never a complete defense. It was a conversation with winter, a negotiation built from mud, moss, hides, and hope. You breathe deeply, letting the patched walls guard you for another hour. You sink back onto the bed for a moment, letting your breath rise in a slow cloud above you. The fire's glow shimmers along the walls, but the deeper tone of the cabin tonight comes not from light, but from sound. You tilt your head slightly and listen. Truly listen. The storm outside isn't just noise. It is its own landscape, shaping the way you experience the night from the inside out. You close your eyes and allow the blizzard's voice to fill your ears. The wind moves across the cabin like a restless chorus, rising in long howls, dipping into low moans, then breaking into sharp rattles against the wooden walls. Some frontier diaries mention how these storms created a soundscape powerful enough to alter sleep patterns, with people drifting in and out of rest in rhythm with the wind. You hear that rhythm now, slow and rolling, like waves crashing against a lonely shore. You stand, walk toward the center of the room, and place your hand gently against the wall. The vibrations shift beneath your fingertips. Each gust hits the cabin with a different cadence, one quick and sharp, another long and twisting, curling around the structure like fingers seeking purchase. You inhale, feeling the hum of the storm travel through your bones. This kind of sound could lull a person into sleep or keep them awake for hours, depending on its temperament. You take a step toward the window and pause. A thin wail slides across the horn pane, swirling like a violin bow drawn too hard across the strings. The storm seems to use every surface as its instrument. Historians often note that blizzards in the frontier regions could produce eerie, almost musical tones when wind passed through tree branches, cabin gaps, or uneven roof shingles. You hear that now as subtle whistles scatter across the rafters. You crouch beside the bed and listen again. The grasses inside the mattress rustle faintly as the cabin shifts. Even the bedding joins in the nocturnal chorus. You lie back and close your eyes. The sound of wind pelting the door resembles handfuls of sand thrown with desperate force. The roof sighs with long groans each time snow slides off its surface. Every sound in this place is alive. A peculiar anecdote from old settlement letters slips into your thoughts. Some families insisted that wolves howled more during storms because the wind distorted distant noises, causing animals to respond to echoes that were not truly there. It is hard to know how accurate that claim was, but as you listen to the storm's layered voice now, you understand how easily the frontier mind could imagine unseen creatures joining the night. You lift your head slightly, straining your ears for subtle differences. Beneath the wind's roar, you catch the rhythmic tapping of snow pellets bouncing off the roof. The pattern changes with each gust, sometimes slow and heavy, sometimes fast, like frantic fingers drumming on a table. You imagine a child listening to this same pattern in a time long past, trying to guess the size of the snowflakes from the sound alone. You breathe in deeply and taste the cold air on your tongue. Even sound seems to have a temperature tonight. The lower groans feel heavy and frigid, while the high whistles feel sharp and icy. The cabin revels in its conversation with the storm, creaking and cracking like an old storyteller responding with well-practiced cues. You run your hand along the bedpost, feeling it tremble faintly with every shift in the blizzard's rhythm. Research notes from later frontier studies mention that many settlers claimed they could predict the storm's length or intensity just by listening. They believed certain tones meant the blizzard was strengthening, while softer ones hinted at its decline. Scholars have never fully agreed on how accurate such auditory predictions were. Some say it was superstition, others insist it reflected generations of lived experience. As the wind rises again outside, you tilt your head and wonder which interpretation feels truer in this moment. You sit up and swing your legs over the edge of the bed. The floorboards groan under your weight, adding their own low note to the night's composition. You walk toward the hearth. Each step echoes through the quiet spaces between gusts. The fire crackles softly, offering a gentle counterpoint to the storm's aggressive orchestra. You kneel beside it and stir a piece of wood, listening to the snapping sparks respond with tiny protests. For a moment, you imagine yourself in a classroom with the storm as your teacher, explaining the art of frontier sleep. Storms instructed pioneers in patience, humility, and awareness. Listening was not optional. It was a skill. You shift position, letting the fire warm your knees, and return to that listening now. The storm changes again. A deep rushing sound builds in the distance, swelling like a wave that grows larger and larger. You brace yourself just as the wind slams into the cabin, rattling the entire structure. Snow bursts against the windows in rapid bursts. The roof lets out a low groan that vibrates the walls. You press your palm to the nearest log, feeling it shiver beneath the winter's force. But the cabin holds. It always holds. You stay there for a long moment, letting the wind's roar wash over you. When it passes, the quiet feels immense. Not silence, but a softer lull. The fire crackles louder now, as though relieved to hear itself again. You listen to the faint hiss of snow moving across the ground outside. It reminds you of sand sliding in an hourglass, marking the passing moments of the night. You walk back to the bed, the floor beneath your feet cool and trembling. You crawl beneath the blanket and let it fold around your shoulders. The soundscape continues, but now it feels almost comforting. The storm has rhythms within rhythms, each one rolling through your mind in steady pulses. You exhale, letting your breath blend into the night's music. You look upward toward the rafters. The wind slips through the eaves with a soft, fluttering murmur. It almost sounds like wings. You imagine birds huddled in nearby trees, riding out the storm with their feathers puffed and eyes half closed. You picture them swaying on branches that creak just like the cabin beams above your head. You close your eyes again, letting the sounds wrap around you. The blizzard, the cabin walls, the fire, your own breathing. It all blends into an ancient lullaby, one that rocked frontier families to sleep whether they wanted it or not. You let your muscles loosen, allowing the storm's voice to guide you into a softer state of mind. Inside this wooden shelter, you are part of a long lineage of listeners, people who slept through storms not despite the noise, but with it, people who let the wind sing them through the night. You shift upright again, rubbing the sleep from your eyes as the storm murmurs along the roof in long strokes of wind. The fire is holding steady, glowing in warm pulses that reach the center of the room, but fade before touching the far corners. You stand, stretch your back, and let your gaze wander across the small cabin. Now you begin to notice the purposeful placement of everything inside it, and how those choices shaped the way pioneers slept on nights exactly like this. You take a slow walk toward the opposite wall. The floorboards creak beneath your feet, announcing every step. You pause by the hearth, which occupies the most central and commanding position inside the cabin. It is not just for cooking or heat, it determines where every person sleeps. Historical writings from frontier settlements consistently point out that families positioned their beds as close to the fire as possible, often angling them to capture maximum warmth without risking stray sparks. You trace that angle with your eyes and feel how intentional it is. You glance at the bed you've been using. It rests in the warmest quadrant of the room, far enough from the draft creeping under the door and shielded from the most vulnerable gap under the window. That choice could have meant the difference between a tolerable night and waking with chilled lungs. You sit on the mattress, press your palm into it, and feel the lingering heat your body has left behind. You look around again, studying the cabin's layout with fresh awareness. There is the main bed frame, wide and long enough for 2 adults, and perhaps a child tucked along the inner edge. But look closer. Beneath it lies a trundle bed, barely noticeable in the dim light. You kneel and slide it out a few inches. Its wooden slats groan softly. A thin mattress lies atop it, stuffed with straw even coarser than the one on the main bed. This was where children or elderly relatives slept, close enough to reach for safety but far enough to give adults room to turn. You push the trundle back gently and stand, wiping straw from your fingers. On the opposite side of the room sits a small platform raised with a few rough planks. You walk toward it. This simple structure could have served as a third sleeping space, especially during severe weather, when families or guests needed to stay together. The platform is cold to the touch, but its height above the floor would have kept sleepers slightly warmer, since cold air pools low. You turn your head toward the main doorway. A small bench rests nearby, smooth from years of use. You tap its surface softly. Some frontier accounts mention that, on bitter nights, solitary travelers were invited to sleep on benches like this, wrapped in spare blankets or old coats, a small but meaningful gesture of hospitality. You can almost picture a weary neighbor sitting there, boots still on, drifting in and out of sleep to the sound of storms just like this one. Your eyes drift upward to the loft. You climb the short ladder, each rung cold beneath your hands. The upper level is cramped, with a low ceiling and beams that force you to crouch. But when you reach the top, you feel something surprising. Warmth. Trapped heat from the hearth rises naturally, gathering beneath the roofline. Some families preferred the loft as their sleeping area, for this very reason. Written recollections from the time note that children often slept up here year-round, their laughter or squabbles drifting through the cracks between the boards. You kneel in the loft and run your hand over a pile of old quilts resting in a corner. The scent is faintly sweet, with age, wool, and smoke. A curious practice comes to mind from a folktale collected in the late 19th century. Some settlers tucked herbs like lavender or sweetgrass into their loft bedding, believing it kept insects away and soothed restless dreams. You bring one quilt closer to your nose and catch a soft aroma that could easily be the ghost of such a tradition. You sit back on your heels and listen. The loft produces its own soundscape. The storm is louder here, the wind closer, the roof beams more responsive. The vibrations thrum like a distant drumbeat. You imagine sleeping here during a blizzard, with every gust shaking the rafters above your head. Some families believed that the loft was safer because heat rose. Others believed it was more dangerous because of the strain storms could place on the roof. Researchers still discuss the safety of loft sleeping, weighing accounts of collapsed roofs against the undeniable warmth. You ease yourself back down the ladder and feel the warmth near the hearth greet you instantly. The lower level remains the heart of the cabin, but its different sleeping spots reveal a silent logic. Everyone had to be close, but not too close. Everyone had to remain warm, but not risk the fire. Everyone needed a position that balanced heat, safety, and space. You return to the bed and sit again, feeling your own warmth collect inside the blankets. You picture a family arranging themselves for the night. The eldest child assigned to the loft because they could climb safely. The youngest placed near the mother on the main bed. A visiting neighbor resting on the bench, perhaps an elderly grandparent lying on the platform, each spot chosen not out of preference, but out of need. You stand once more and cross the room slowly, letting your steps map the sleeping geography. You feel how every sound, from the crack in the logs to the whistle at the window, shapes where a person might want to rest. You learn the layout not by sight but by the way warmth pools in uneven pockets across the cabin. Here a draft, there a warm patch, here a cold corner, there a safe niche. You stop near the hearth and turn back to face the room. The firelight stretches across the floorboards, creating long shadows. Each of those shadows touches a sleeping place, a reminder that this room was never designed around comfort alone. It was designed around survival, closeness, and the quiet rhythms of frontier nights. You inhale slowly, letting the scent of smoke and wool fill your lungs. As you settle once more on the bed and tug the blankets over your legs, you feel the cabin's layout gently shaping your own posture. Every corner, every beam, every seam hums with a memory of someone who once slept, woke, tended the fire, or whispered into the darkness as the storm raged. You close your eyes and listen. The cabin breathes softly around you. The night prepares to deepen. You let your eyes drift halfway open again, sensing a new heaviness in the air. Not from cold this time, but from the unmistakable scent of smoke threading through the cabin. You inhale cautiously. The air tastes dry, woody, and slightly bitter. You push yourself upright and walk toward the hearth, feeling a faint sting in your nose. The fire is burning well enough, but the smoke that should be pulling cleanly through the chimney lingers instead, curling low under the rafters like a tired ghost searching for an exit. You crouch beside the hearth, watching the flames dance unevenly. They lean lazily toward one side, as though pulled by a wandering breath of air. Frontier accounts make it clear that early chimneys were notoriously unreliable. Many were built from stacked stones sealed with mud, while others were constructed from sticks plastered with clay that hardened over time. You examine the chimney throat, noticing how irregular it is. One side dips slightly, the other bulges inward. These imperfections shaped the way smoke moved, sometimes helping it flow upward, sometimes trapping it inside the room. You lift your hand slowly, letting your fingers hover over the rising warmth. The air feels disturbed, as though something is blocking the natural current. You stand and move toward the cabin door. When you lift the latch, a thin line of icy air slips inside. The draft tugs at the smoke immediately. The grey wisps respond by swirling upward, their path suddenly more purposeful. You narrow your eyes. A small adjustment in airflow can make the difference between a breathable night and a suffocating one. You ease the door shut, then crouch again near the hearth. There is an unusual detail you remember from a frontier journal. Some families intentionally left tiny holes or thin gaps near the base of the cabin wall to create a steady draft that fed the fire and guided smoke toward the chimney. Too much wind stole heat. Too little wind trapped smoke. That balance was delicate. You glance around the walls, tracing the draft lines with your fingertips until you find a small seam near the corner. You widen it just slightly with your thumb. Instantly the smoke shifts, rising more smoothly. You breathe a little easier, but the smell still laces through the cabin. Smoke settles into every surface here. Blankets, hair, clothing. Even the logs themselves are stained dark with it. You run your hand along the wall and feel the soot cling faintly to your skin. It makes you think about how families lived with this constant haze. Some nights, it was light enough to ignore. Other nights, it grew thick enough that eyes watered and throats burned until someone crawled out into the cold air just to breathe. You step back toward the hearth and watch as a coil of smoke curls over the lip of the chimney opening. It drifts lazily across the ceiling beams before dissolving. The movement is hypnotic, soft and swirling like ink in water. No wonder frontier sleepers drifted into strange, half-dreaming states on smoky nights. The air itself pressed down on them, coaxing them toward a hazy kind of rest. You rub your eyes slowly, feeling that same heaviness tugging at your thoughts. A curious folk belief comes to mind, one that claimed smoke drifting in slow circles above a sleeper's head could influence their dreams, making them vivid or unsettling. It is impossible to know how widespread that belief was, but as you watch the smoke spiral in lazy loops, you understand how easily such ideas could take root. The patterns are mesmerizing, shaping your imagination with each slow turn. You move toward the chimney and lean closer, feeling for warmth along the outer stones. Some are hot, some barely warm at all. The uneven heating reveals that the chimney's interior is likely crooked or partially obstructed. A bird's nest, a loose brick, or even built-up soot might be interfering with the upward pull. Scholars still discuss the prevalence of chimney blockages in early cabins, noting how dangerous they could be during winter storms when ventilation options were limited. You step back, rubbing your hands together to chase away the chill settling into your fingertips. You stir the fire carefully, shifting a few logs so the flames lift higher, giving smoke a more forceful push upward. Sparks leap in tiny bursts, sizzling as they settle back into the heart of the fire. The flames brighten, casting warm patches of light against the ceiling where thin trails of smoke curl. You take a slow breath. The smoky air scratches slightly at your throat, but it also carries a comforting familiarity. This was the smell that clung to the clothing of pioneer travelers when they visited neighboring cabins. The scent that lingered in children's hair long after winter ended. The odor that seeped so deeply into log walls that it remained for generations. You exhale softly, letting that smoky warmth settle on your tongue. You step toward the bed again and sit, pulling the blanket over your knees. Even here, farther from the fire, the smoke is noticeable. It hovers near the ceiling, but the faintest hint reaches your senses with each breath. You rest your head against the wooden post and listen to the soft crackling of the fire. The sound becomes a soothing counterbalance to the drifting haze. You close your eyes briefly. The cabin feels dreamy now, softened by the smoky curtain overhead. The storm outside continues swirling, but its voice feels distant, muted behind the haze. The warm glow near the hearth becomes a comforting beacon, even as the air thickens around it. You imagine how a family might have sat awake in this same cabin, coughing lightly, blinking at the haze, yet refusing to let the fire die because the cold outside was a far greater danger. You open your eyes once more and breathe slowly. The mix of warmth, smoke, and winter creates a strange, almost hypnotic atmosphere. It is imperfect, it is uncomfortable, yet it is part of the frontier sleep experience. Every inhalation reminds you that comfort was never guaranteed. Pioneers accepted a little smoke in their lungs if it meant waking up alive in the morning. You pull the blanket tighter and let the haze thicken around the rafters. Winter nights like this were battles fought quietly, breath by breath, flame by flame. You steady yourself, finding your place within the smoky glow of the cabin, ready to slip deeper into the long night ahead. You rise slowly from the bed again, rubbing the smoke from your eyes as the fire gives a tired crackle. Your stomach reminds you of something the pioneers understood well. Warmth does not come only from blankets, fire, or shared bodies. It also comes from within. You walk toward the small wooden table in the corner, where a humble spread of provisions sits waiting. The room brightens just a little as the firelight catches the edge of a tin cup and the soft sheen of a battered pot. You lift the pot carefully, feeling the lingering warmth along its base. The scent of broth clings to it, mild but comforting. Frontier records often highlight the importance of a hot meal before bed on winter nights. A simple stew, a thick porridge, or even warm milk could raise a person's core temperature enough to help them last through the coldest hours. You tilt the pot and watch a small wisp of steam rise. The smell is earthy, full of root vegetables and a hint of herbs. You pour a little into the cup and cradle it in both hands. The metal is warm enough to sting your palms slightly. You sip slowly. The liquid spreads heat through your chest, moving like a gentle wave from your throat down to your stomach. You feel the warmth radiate outward toward your arms and legs. It is subtle but steady. You imagine a family sitting at this same table after a long day, sharing a modest but hot meal, knowing it might be the difference between restless shivering and a few hours of real sleep. You breathe in the steam rising from the cup, closing your eyes for a moment as the aroma settles around you. There is a tiny sweetness hidden in the broth, perhaps from carrots or dried apples added to stretch the meal. A curious anecdote from a pioneer diary flickers in your memory. Some families mixed molasses into hot water to create a simple makeshift tonic that warmed the body quickly. You imagine the taste, thick and comforting, poured into wooden cups just before bed. You set the cup down and look across the table at a loaf of coarse bread. Its crust is dark, its shape uneven. You break off a piece and chew slowly. The texture is dense, gritty, but satisfying. The warmth in your stomach grows as you eat. You run your fingers across the loaf and imagine the work required to make it. Grinding grain by hand, kneading dough in a cold room, letting it rise near the fire. Something so simple carried hours of labor. You return to the pot and stir its contents with a wooden spoon. A few pieces of dried meat float near the surface, swollen and soft. The smell deepens as you stir. Many settlers believed that a fatty meal kept the body warmer through the night, and evidence from nutritional studies suggests they may have been right. You lift a piece of stew toward your mouth and let it dissolve on your tongue. Salt, smoke, earth, warmth. The flavors feel like part of the cabin itself. You stand again and move toward a small shelf where herbs hang in dried bundles. Their shadows sway slightly in the draft that slips through the rafters. You reach up and brush your fingers over one of the bundles. The scent of mint releases instantly, sharp and cooling. Another bundle smells like sage. A lesser-known practice from frontier households comes to mind. Some people brewed warm herbal teas before bed, believing they calmed the nerves and eased breathing in smoky cabins. You lift a sprig of mint and breathe deeply, imagining the taste swirling through a cup of hot water. You return to the hearth and place a small kettle of water onto the stones beside the fire. It begins to hiss softly as the heat reaches it. You settle onto the stool, warming your hands. The water slowly begins to steam, adding moisture to the dry, smoky air. You place a few mint leaves into your cup and pour hot water over them. The scent rises immediately, filling the space with a surprising brightness. You blow gently and sip. The warm liquid glides into you, pushing away the chill. A question emerges in your thoughts as you drink. Did pioneers rely more on hearty meals or hot drinks before sleep? Accounts differ. Some settlers insisted on a heavy supper, believing a full stomach fueled warmth. Others preferred something lighter, worried that overeating might keep them awake or waste resources. Researchers still discuss these differences, comparing diary entries and letters to uncover regional habits. You set the cup aside and let the warmth settle deeper into your body. The fire crackles in soft intervals, and the storm outside adds its own distant percussion. You rub your hands slowly, feeling life return to your fingertips. You can almost imagine sitting beside a large frontier family at this same hearth, each person drinking something warm, laughing softly, or whispering final thoughts before crawling into bed. You pick up a small wooden bowl from the table. Inside are dried apple slices, curled and pale. You lift one and bite into it. The flavor is faintly sweet, with a hint of smoke absorbed during drying. Apples like these were treasured during winter. They offered not just nourishment, but a reminder of warmer days. You chew slowly, letting the sweetness linger. You sit back on the bed and wrap the blanket around your shoulders again. The warmth in your stomach spreads outward, softening the chill at your fingertips and toes. The fire's glow feels more soothing now, more companionable. You breathe deeply, letting the scents of mint, stew, and wood smoke mingle around you. Food gave pioneers more than heat. It gave them pause. It helped shape the evening into something calmer, something almost ritualistic. You lean against the bedpost, closing your eyes briefly as the warmth settles fully into your bones. The night still rages outside, but inside your body, a quiet fire begins to burn. You let your breath fall into a slow rhythm. The warmth endures. The storm continues. The cabin holds. This is how pioneers prepared their bodies for sleep, one small bowl of heat at a time. You rise again, feeling the warmth from your meal settle quietly inside your chest. The fire glows steadily, but winter nights on the frontier never allowed for certainty. You step closer to the hearth and watch the flames sway, knowing exactly why pioneer families divided the night into shifts. Someone always had to stay awake. Someone always had to guard the room against the cold, the darkness, and the unpredictable pulse of the storm. You crouch near the hearth and feel the heat brush your cheeks. Frontier accounts frequently describe families taking turns tending the fire through the night, especially when heavy snowstorms threatened to smother warmth or smother entire cabins. You adjust a log with the iron poker, listening as the fire responds with a soft crackle. The sound reminds you that the flames are living things out here, hungry for attention and quick to fade if neglected. You sit on the low stool for a moment, imagining yourself as the designated watcher for this stretch of night. Your role is simple. Keep the flames alive. Keep the cabin warm. Keep the danger at bay. You listen to the storm raging outside and feel the weight of that responsibility settling across your shoulders. A curious detail from a homesteader's letter floats through your memory. Some families believed that whoever served the first watch had to whisper a brief blessing or good wish to the fire, encouraging it to stay lively. Whether superstition or habit, the motion itself offered comfort, something small and human in the midst of nature's roar. You whisper a quiet sentiment toward the flames now, half amused, half participating. The fire flickers in reply. You stand and stretch your back, moving to the window. The pane quivers softly as wind presses against it. Snowflakes cling to its surface in pale clusters. You run your fingertips along the frame, feeling the cold slide into your hand. You imagine a parent or older sibling stepping over sleeping family members to check on the door, the shutters, and the cracks that tend to grow larger when storm winds pull at them. You walk toward the door and test the latch. It rattles, then holds steady. A faint draft curls around your ankles. You pull a wool scrap from a peg and roll it into the gap along the base. The air stutters, then stills. You nod to yourself. The fire watcher's job was never passive. It required constant small adjustments, each one buying another hour of warmth. You return to the hearth and settle yourself on the stool once more. The fire warms your knees and illuminates the darkened room in slow pulses. You glance at the bed where you had been resting. The blankets rise and fall slightly with your breathing imprint still trapped beneath them. You can imagine a family sleeping there now, unaware of your watchful presence. You feel protective of them, even if they exist only in memory and imagination. A point of disagreement among historians crosses your thoughts. Some believe these night watches were strictly organized, with clear shifts and responsibilities. Others argue that families simply woke whenever they felt a drop in temperature or heard the fire dying. Without written schedules, the truth likely changed from cabin to cabin. What remains certain is that someone always woke, even without planning. Cold has a way of nudging human instincts. You rise again and add a small log to the fire. Flames curl eagerly around it, brightening the room. The warmth spreads out in gentle waves, touching your arms and chest. You tilt your head back and listen to the cabin breathe. Creaks, sighs, faint tapping from snow sliding off the roof. Every sound tells you the structure is holding on. You step toward the small shelf beside the hearth. A bundle of twigs sits there, gathered earlier in the evening. You break one and let it snap between your fingers. Pioneers often kept kindling close to the fire watcher's seat, knowing that a fast response could save them from a slow, creeping cold. You place a few twigs on the embers and watch them ignite with a sharp, satisfying hiss. Your eyes drift again to the window. The storm rumbles in the distance, then rolls forward, pushing snow against the walls in steady waves. You lean closer to the glass and feel the cold radiating through it. In some cabins, watch duty included listening for sounds outside stray livestock, shifting snowdrifts, or the distant cry of an animal caught in the storm. The frontier could be unpredictable. One ear always stayed tuned to the world beyond the wooden walls. You breathe deeply and let the fire's warmth relax your shoulders. A new sound catches your attention. The low rumble of the wind drops suddenly, leaving behind the soft crackle of flames and the faint rustle of settling snow. You take the moment to rest your elbows on your knees, feeling your eyes grow heavy. This was part of the watch as well, fighting sleep while cradled by heat and darkness. You blink slowly, knowing that drifting too deeply would be dangerous. The fire watcher served as the barrier between life and cold, between comfort and fear. You picture an older sibling shaking themselves awake, forcing their eyes open each time they slipped into drowsiness. You picture a parent standing at the hearth, hands resting on the mantel, letting the fire's glow guide their thoughts. You shake off your sleepiness and rise once more. You move through the cabin, checking each corner with deliberate quiet. Your footsteps remain soft, careful not to disturb the imagined sleepers. You adjust the hide near the wall. You wedge a cloth deeper into a crack. You touch the beams with the back of your hand to sense temperature changes. Small tasks, repeated endlessly. You return to the stool and settle near the fire again. The flames have calmed, steady and bright. The storm's voice has softened but not vanished. You warm your palms and let the heat gather in your fingertips. This is what night watches were. Quiet labor in a quiet room, while the world outside fought fiercely against the wooden shell that protected a sleeping family. You breathe slowly, letting the stillness settle into your bones. The fire glows on, the storm whispers, and you stand guard, just as countless pioneers once did through long, snowy nights. You ease yourself up from the fire watcher's stool, stretching your stiff legs as the warmth slips away from your shins. The cabin feels different now. Not quieter, exactly, but more alert, as if the night itself is holding its breath while the storm gathers strength outside. You take a slow step toward the back wall, where a cluster of tools rests in a neat, practical arrangement. Their silhouettes look sharp in the flickering firelight, each one waiting for the moment it might be needed. You kneel beside the largest tool first, a long-handled axe with a worn, polished grip. Many pioneer journals mention that essential tools were kept close during winter storms, not for chores but for emergencies. If snow blocked the door, an axe could carve an exit. If a fallen tree pressed against the cabin, the same tool could free the structure. You run your fingers along the handle, feeling grooves shaped by hands far more experienced than yours. The wood is warm on the upper half from exposure to the room, colder near the blade. You lift it slightly, just enough to feel its weight. It is heavier than you expect. Solid, dependable. You imagine a parent waking in the middle of the night to the sound of branches cracking overhead, gripping this same axe, ready to rush outside if the roof were threatened. The thought sends a small shiver through you, not from cold but from respect. You set the axe down gently and reach for the second tool, a long wooden pole with a blunt end. At first it looks unremarkable, but then you remember an unusual detail from a settler's recollection. Families used these poles to poke snow off roofs when the weight grew dangerous. One sharp push through the loft window could send sheets of snow sliding safely to the ground. You turn the pole in your hands and picture a teenage boy in rough winter clothes climbing into the loft, using the pole to clear drifts while his parents paced anxiously below. You stand and move to a smaller tool laid carefully near the hearth. A short-handled shovel, edges blackened from use, lies there like a sleeping animal. Its surface carries faint traces of ash and packed snow. Some families kept a shovel indoors because stepping outside during a blizzard to dig away snow could be fatal. You run your thumb along the metal, cold and slightly rough. You can almost see a pioneer crouched by the door, clearing drifts that threaten to trap everyone inside. A faint scratching sound drifts through the wall. You turn your head toward it. The noise is soft, rhythmic, almost polite. Snow pressing against the logs. You walk closer and place your palm flat against the wood. The vibration is unmistakable. Snow is piling high outside, leaning with its full weight into the cabin structure. You inhale slowly, imagining the early morning chore of hacking through the drifted wall of white just to open the door. You walk toward the shelf where smaller essentials rest. A clay oil lamp, a knife, a folded piece of heavy canvas. You lift the canvas and unfold it slightly. Its edges are reinforced by old stitching. Families sometimes used canvas to cover gaps, but they also used it during emergencies, as makeshift sleds or stretchers. You fold it back carefully, placing it exactly where you found it. Your eyes drift downward toward a small wooden box. You open it quietly. Inside lies a coil of rope, frayed in some spots yet strong. Frontier records often describe rope as a lifeline used for securing doors in high winds, hauling supplies through deep snow, or even tying children's jackets together so they would not wander off in whiteout conditions. You unwind a length of it, feeling the rough fibers scrape across your palms. Its presence is oddly comforting. You place the rope back neatly, then stand and look around the room. Every object seems to glow with purpose. Every tool earns its place by necessity. The pioneers did not keep clutter, they kept survival close at hand. Another memory rises unbidden. A note from an early settler writing about predators wandering close to cabins during storms. Not boldly, but stealthily, seeking the shelter of human structures. Wolves, stray dogs, occasionally even mountain lions in desperate times. It is impossible to know how often this occurred, but the thought was enough to make families keep weapons nearby. You glance at the old musket resting above the doorframe. Its barrel is dusty, but its presence serves a purpose. You touch its stock gently, feeling the cold wood under your fingertips. A subtle debate among researchers surfaces in your mind. Some argue that tools near beds were common only in wilder regions, where danger from animals or thieves was real. Others believe every cabin kept at least a few items within arm's reach, simply because storms could escalate suddenly, turning routine nights into emergencies. You step back, considering both perspectives. But the truth is easy to feel. In this isolated cabin, caution was a form of wisdom. You kneel beside the door now, pushing your fingers under the bottom edge. You feel packed snow, already beginning to rise against it. Not enough to trap you, but enough to make you aware of how quickly conditions can change. You stand and secure the latch firmly, knowing the storm might yet have more to say tonight. You look toward the fire again, noticing how the tools cast long shadows that flicker across the walls. They almost seem to move, dancing with every shift of flame. The cabin breathes in slow, steady pulses. You sit again on the stool, watching the light stretch and narrow, stretch and narrow. Tools were not just objects in a frontier cabin. They were companions, protectors, silent promises that the family had options when the world grew unpredictable. You wrap your blanket around your shoulders and let the sight of them settle your nerves. The axe, the pole, the shovel, the rope, the musket, all patient, all ready. You draw a long breath and lean back against the bedpost. The storm tightens its grip outside, but inside, you feel prepared, in the quiet way pioneers once felt prepared, surrounded not by wealth or comforts, but by the practical strength of simple tools resting in the fire's glow. You close your eyes, letting that sense of readiness cradle you. You settle against the bedpost again, letting your breathing slow as the storm hums along the wooden walls. For a moment the room feels almost peaceful, almost drowsy, but then your thoughts drift to the smallest members of frontier families, children who slept through storms with wide eyes, restless limbs, and imaginations far too vivid for winter nights in lonely cabins. You pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders and let the shadows deepen around you, trying to see the room as a child might have seen it. You sit quietly, listening to the wind push snow against the cabin. The sound is deep and shifting, like something alive pacing outside. Frontier writings often describe how children whispered fears to one another under the blankets, imagining monsters, ghosts, or wandering spirits swirling in the storm's voice. You close your eyes and listen. The wind wails high, suddenly dipping low, almost sounding like a distant cry. You can understand why a child would tremble a little before sleep. You walk toward the far corner where the trundle bed rests beneath the main frame. You pull it out gently. The straw mattress inside is lumpy and uneven, but the bedding is arranged with surprising care. A small wool blanket lies folded across it, patched with squares of different colors. You run your hand over the patches, each one sewn with rough but loving stitches. A mother's or father's fingers once mended these pieces to keep the child warm through endless winter nights. You sit on the edge of the trundle bed. It creaks softly. The blanket smells faintly of smoke and something sweeter, maybe dried apples or old soap. A detail from a pioneer account comes to mind. Some families tucked small comfort tokens beside children at night, like carved wooden animals or scraps of worn fabric from a parent's clothing. You lift the blanket slightly and find a tiny shape beneath the pillow. A small wooden figure, roughly carved, rests there. You hold it in your palm, feeling the smooth, rounded edges shaped by love rather than skill. You imagine a child gripping this little figure tightly while storms roared outside, pressing it against their chest to steady their heartbeat. Children lived close to fear in cabins like these. Darkness meant isolation, storms meant danger, and the world beyond the door felt impossibly wide and wild. You tuck the wooden figure back beneath the pillow and let the blanket fall gently into place. Another sound rises, a gentle knocking, not from outside but from deep within the walls as the wind shifts. You glance upward. The rafters creak. The logs answer with groans. You breathe in slowly, letting the cabin's voice fill your ears. To an adult it is simply weather and wood, but to a child each sound could become a footstep, a claw, or a whisper. Some old settlers wrote about children believing spirits traveled with snowstorms. Whether it was just imagination or a fragment of folklore carried across generations, the fear was real to those who lay awake listening. You step away from the trundle and move toward the window. You place your hand against the horn pane. The surface trembles under your touch. Outside, white shapes swirl wildly, blurring into shifting forms. You exhale softly and imagine a child watching the same shapes, convinced they saw figures dancing in the storm. A hint of movement here, a wraith-like swirl there. Fear flourished easily in a world without electric light. You stand quietly, letting the cold that radiates from the window seep into your fingertips. A faint scraping sound drifts from the door, probably wind dragging a branch across the threshold. You feel your pulse shift. Even as an adult, the unpredictability of these noises keeps you alert. You picture a child whispering urgently to a sibling, asking what that sound was. The older sibling pretending to know the answer, pretending they were not afraid too. You step back toward the hearth and sit on the stool again. The fire pops gently, sending a small cascade of sparks upward. You gaze into the flames, remembering that some families told calming stories before bed to soothe frightened children. Tales of brave ancestors, kind spirits, or clever animals that guided lost travelers home. Warm stories woven within the cold night. You imagine a parent rocking a child by the fire, whispering with soft rhythms, hoping the comfort would outlast the fear. You pull your knees closer and let the fire warm your shins. A faint sweetness lingers in the air where dried herbs hang above the hearth. One small tradition springs to mind. In certain frontier communities, parents sprinkled tiny bits of sweetgrass near children's bedding to chase away nightmares. Whether superstition or kindness, the gesture made children feel protected. You lean forward, catching the faint scent, and imagine a child drifting into sleep, believing the grass kept ghosts away. You stand again and move back toward the bed. The blankets lie rumpled from where you sat earlier. You smooth them out, letting your palm rest on the warm fabric. Children often slept sandwiched between older siblings or parents during storms, absorbing warmth from both sides. Safety came not only from temperature, but from touch. A small hand reaching out in the dark to grasp another could turn fear into something manageable. You sit at the edge of the mattress and close your eyes. The storm outside throbs with deeper intensity now. The roof creaks in long stretches. The walls answer. Somewhere behind the partition, an animal shifts, adding a low grunt to the night's chorus. Every sound intertwines. To a child, this could feel like a world full of unseen creatures pressing close. To you, it feels like a world of memories layered across generations. A quiet debate still arises among researchers studying frontier life. Did pioneer children become hardened to fear because of these conditions, or were they simply better at hiding it? The letters and journals left behind suggest both possibilities. You sit in the dim glow, feeling the weight of that question, knowing the truth likely varied from child to child. You pull the blanket around your shoulders again and lie back slowly. The mattress shifts under you with its familiar whisper. You imagine a child curling beside you, clutching the little wooden figure you found earlier, hiding their face in the fabric while listening to the storm's restless symphony. The fire flickers softly, your breath slows, and for a moment you feel the mix of fear and comfort that shaped so many childhood nights in cabins just like this one. You open your eyes again, stirring beneath the blanket as the storm's distant growl threads through the cabin. The fire still glows in quiet ripples, but now your attention drifts toward the smaller, stranger rituals woven into frontier nights. You rise from the bed and let your feet find the cool floorboards. The cabin seems to shift as you stand, as if bracing itself for the weight of old beliefs carried through winters long forgotten. You walk slowly toward the hearth, where shadows ripple along the logs. Frontier families did not rely solely on fire and blankets for protection against the long dark. They carried with them a bundle of inherited customs, charms, and quiet gestures meant to soothe the night and whatever unseen forces might roam with the snow. Some of these practices came from Europe, others were borrowed from indigenous neighbors. Many were created in the moment by frightened minds seeking comfort. You crouch by the hearth and study the embers, imagining how these stories once settled over children at bedtime like an extra layer of warmth. You lift a small iron trivet from beside the fire. Its surface is darkened, mottled, and warm. There was a belief in some frontier communities that placing iron near the fireplace warded off harmful spirits that supposedly wandered through storms. You set it down gently again, feeling a soft amusement at the thought, yet also a quiet respect. Iron was precious. Families would not waste it unless it carried meaning. You stand and move toward a bundle of dried herbs hanging near the rafters. The scents drift faintly downward, earthy and familiar. In a few old accounts, settlers described burning certain herbs in the hearth just before sleep, not for fragrance alone, but because they believed the smoke encouraged good dreams or chased away restless energies that could follow the snow indoors. You brush your fingers over one dry sprig and imagine a parent adding it to a fading fire, while whispering a gentle hope for peaceful rest. You turn your gaze toward the doorway. A small leather pouch hangs from a peg nearby, its string worn smooth. You take it in hand, feeling the contents shift inside. Small stones, perhaps, bits of bone or seeds. Some families use such pouches as protective charms, placing them near the door to keep misfortune outside. Nobody can say exactly when these traditions began, but oral histories hint that settlers clung to any comfort when storms shrieked loud enough to shake the soul. You place the pouch back and let your fingers rest on the peg. A fading draft curls under the door and brushes your ankles. You inhale slowly. Sounds mingle around you. The storm whines. The fire murmurs. The cabin groans. These noises would have inspired stories whispered in hushes. Tales of wandering spirits who followed travelers through forests. Stories of winter guardians who watched over cabins. Legends carried by people who lived so close to nature that it felt personal. You walk toward the bed once more and sit on its edge, feeling the mattress shift beneath your weight. A faint memory from an old settlement record rises in your mind. Some families believed that placing a broom across the threshold kept troublesome spirits from entering at night. You glance toward the door. A simple broom leans there, bristles rough and splayed. Maybe coincidence, maybe tradition, but you can imagine a mother or father placing it deliberately each night, just in case. You stretch your arms and let your gaze travel up to the rafters again. The beams hold faint patterns of frost, glistening in the firelight. Another practice from early frontier families surfaces in your thoughts. Some hung small objects, feathers, beads, tiny woven charms above children's sleeping spaces, hoping they would filter out bad dreams. You study the rafters and imagine the soft sway of such a charm, moving gently with each draft. You rise and move toward the small table near the window. On it lies a shallow wooden bowl containing a bit of salt. You tap the surface lightly with your fingertip. In certain communities, a pinch of salt near the bedside was believed to protect against misfortune. Even those who did not believe fully often practiced it out of habit, or perhaps comfort. You drag your fingertip across the bowl, feeling the coarse grains shift beneath your touch. There is a faint, lingering sweetness in the air, something familiar. You step toward the hearth again and notice a bundle of sweetgrass tucked neatly beside a beam. You remember reading that sweetgrass burned slowly and released a warming scent that many believed brought peace to restless nights. You lift the bundle to your nose and breathe in. The aroma carries memories of warm seasons, sunlight, and calmer days. You place it back gently. A question stirs in your mind. How much of this was belief, and how much was necessity disguised as ritual? Researchers continue to debate how deeply superstition influenced pioneer households. Some argue that charm-making and protective gestures were essential psychological tools, helping families feel control in an environment ruled by weather and wilderness. Others believe the rituals were rare embellishments, not as common as folklore suggests. You sit quietly with these thoughts, feeling the cabin's silence settle around you. The fire pops softly, releasing a tiny spark that dances upward. You follow its brief flight with your eyes, watching it fade into the dimness. You lean forward on your knees and rest your elbows on the bed. The shadows around you shift with every flicker of flame. Those shadows once held meaning for frightened minds. You can almost hear a child whispering to a parent, asking whether strange shapes moving in the corner were just shadows or something more. A parent sighing, brushing the child's hair back, offering comfort wrapped in steady words. You lie back again, pulling the blanket over your chest. The cabin creaks overhead. A long, slow groan echoes through the rafters. You imagine a child tugging the blanket higher over their chin, convinced that some winter spirit walked across the roof. You smile softly, not mocking the fear but understanding its honesty. Nights like this transform familiar places into landscapes touched by myth. You exhale and let your thoughts drift. The fire, the herbs, the charms, the whispered stories, all of it creates a kind of spiritual insulation, not visible like moss in the walls but felt in the chest. These quiet rituals softened the edge of fear, giving shape and meaning to the unknown. You close your eyes slowly. Winter storms always carried mysteries, and the pioneers learned to meet them with warmth, with stories, with faith in whatever small protections they could gather. You open your eyes once more, feeling the shift in the air before you even register the sound. The storm's voice outside dips for a moment, replaced by a softer, almost hesitant rhythm, a muffled thump, then another. Not the wild pounding of wind or snow, but something human, something intentional. You rise slowly from the bed, wrapping the blanket around your shoulders as you move toward the door. You pause halfway across the room, listening. In frontier life, neighbors sometimes appeared in the middle of the night, seeking warmth, shelter, or help. It did not matter if the storm raged or the hour was late. When the world was this unforgiving, community became part of survival. You step carefully, letting the floorboards creak under your feet as the sound comes again, softer this time, almost a plea. You approach the door and press your ear against its cold wooden surface. A faint shuffle drifts through, barely audible over the whistle of the wind. You imagine a neighbor, their lantern extinguished by the storm, coat stiff with snow, breath trembling as they knock one more time. Frontier journals consistently mention such nighttime visits during winter storms. It was common practice to leave the door unlatched, or at least respond quickly, because no one wanted to risk sending a visitor back into the deadly cold. You lift the latch just a finger's width, and let a sliver of light flicker across the snow outside. Nothing moves in the narrow view except swirling white shadows. The cold rushes in instantly, carving a sting across your cheeks. You close the door again, careful not to slam it. Perhaps the knocking came from the storm, twisting loose branches or rattling tools hanging outside. But a strange, particular rhythm lingers in your mind. It felt intentional. You step back into the warmth and glance around the cabin. If a visitor arrived, where would they rest? The bench near the door catches your eye. You rub your palm across its surface, feeling the familiar smoothness. That bench had likely welcomed many weary figures in winters long gone. You imagine a neighbor stumbling inside, collapsing onto it, while someone hurried to offer a blanket and a cup of something warm. You kneel near the hearth and add a small log to encourage the flames. Firelight spills further across the room, brushing the door with gold. You stare at the latch, listening for any new sound. Snow slithers along the outside walls, but nothing else arrives. Perhaps the moment has passed. Yet you can sense the lingering presence of all those who once stood in such doorways, waiting for help. A particular detail from a settler's diary returns to your thoughts. Families often developed informal signals for those nighttime visits during storms. 3 soft knocks meant neighbor. A scrape followed by a knock meant trouble. A single firm knock meant cold traveler. Whether such systems were consistently used or not, the idea itself speaks to the close-knit nature of frontier communities. People looked out for one another because they had no choice. You rise and walk toward the small window. The storm swirls outside, painting patterns across the horn pane. Through the shifting white, you imagine distant cabins where other families might be stirring too. You picture someone miles away tending their fire, checking their tools, listening for a knock on their own door. The sense of shared experience stretches across the snowy world like an invisible thread. You breathe gently, fogging the pain slightly. The storm presses on, relentless and white. You try to picture how it felt to hear real footsteps crunching through the drifts, approaching your cabin with weary determination. The excitement, the fear, the responsibility. You blink slowly, letting the faint imagined echoes fade. Then another sound appears. This one is softer, more like a gentle tapping against the side wall. You walk over, curiosity pulling you forward. As you touch the log, the tapping continues for a moment before fading again. Snow dislodging from the roof, a stray branch, or a neighbor testing whether someone inside was awake. You breathe slowly, letting your hand rest on the cold timber. There is no way to know for certain. You return to the fire and settle onto the stool, watching the flames ripple. A thoughtful warmth builds in your chest, not just from the heat but from the memory of a tradition described in several frontier writings. When a traveler arrived unexpectedly, families never asked for explanations until the visitor was warm, fed, and rested. Questions waited. Comfort came first. It was an unspoken rule of survival. You brush ash from the hearthstone and glance toward the bench again. You can almost see a figure wrapped in heavy coats, sitting there with hunched shoulders, hands trembling near the fire. A parent might bring them a bowl of broth or a handful of dried fruit. A child might peek from under blankets, watching the mysterious visitor with wide, curious eyes. There is still gentle debate among researchers about how often these nighttime neighbor visits occurred. Some insist they were rare exceptions, moments of emergency. Others believe they were a regular part of winter life, woven into the social fabric of frontier communities. From where you sit now, hearing the storm's lonely voice outside, the second interpretation feels more likely. Humans reach for one another when the world grows cold. You rise and check the latch one more time. It holds firmly. The draft beneath the door hums softly, shifting like a small animal. You place a folded cloth across it, then stand for a moment in silence, letting the weight of possibility settle in your chest. Whether the knocking came from a branch or a wandering neighbor lost in the storm, the instinct to check, to listen, to be ready, that instinct is part of what kept frontier families alive. You return to the hearth, drawing your blanket tight around your shoulders. The fire warms you, the storm sings outside, and somewhere in the snowy dark, real or imagined, a traveler might still be searching for a friendly door. You rise from your place beside the hearth, stretching out the stiffness that has settled into your shoulders. The storm outside gives a low, dragging roar that rolls across the cabin walls like a massive, unseen wave. You can feel the pressure shift in the logs themselves. The structure tightens, flexes, then relaxes with a long wooden sigh. You draw a slow breath and step toward the far corner where a faint draft slips across the floor. Something in the room feels different. Not dangerous, not yet, but restless. This is the hour when the cabin begins to show its weak points. You press your hand against the wall and feel a slight tremor run through the timber. Frontier diaries often describe how storms tested the very bones of a cabin, revealing cracks and leaks that went unnoticed during calmer weather. You run your fingers along one such seam, noticing how the chinking has loosened. The wind pushes through the crack in thin, cold pulses. You reach for a wad of dried grass from the stool nearby and press it into the gap, packing it with your thumb until the draft lessens. You step back and listen. The roof groans overhead as another gust hits the cabin at an odd angle. A sprinkle of snow dust falls from the beams, drifting lazily onto your hair and shoulders. You brush it off and look upward. A narrow line of pale frost stretches along one of the rafters, shimmering faintly in the firelight. You hear a small cracking sound, not loud, but sharp enough to draw your attention. Somewhere near the roofline, a shingle or beam is shifting under the storm's weight. You move cautiously toward the ladder leading to the loft. Each rung creaks as you climb. When you reach the top, the wind's voice becomes louder, vibrating the roof like a great taut drum. You crouch and run your hand along the beam. It feels solid, but the cold has made the wood contract. A thin line of snow has forced its way inside through a gap you hadn't noticed before. You scrape it away, feeling the icy grains melt against your fingertips. Down below in the shadows near the hearth, the flames flicker as a new draft sneaks into the cabin. You descend the ladder quickly and cross the room to check the wall opposite the window. As you lay your hand against the logs, a shiver ripples through the timber. That is when you spot it. A small section of chinking near the floor has crumbled completely, leaving a gap large enough for snow to drift through in a slow, feathery stream. You kneel and examine the damage. A curious detail from a settler's notebook comes to mind. During storms like this, families often kept small repair kits by the hearth, little bundles of clay, dry mud, moss, cloth scraps, and even bark. You reach for the supplies laid earlier on the stool and begin pressing moss and clay together into a cold, pliable mixture. Your fingers sting from the chill as you force the material into the gap, smoothing it as best you can. The wind presses again, testing your repair. The moss holds. The draft weakens. You sit back on your heels, breathing deeply, feeling the satisfaction of one small victory against the storm. Then another sound reaches your ears, a thudding, not from the walls but from the roof. You look up sharply. Snow is sliding across the shingles in uneven sheets. Some of it slips cleanly to the ground. Some gets caught along the eaves, building in heavy ridges. Too much weight could buckle a weak beam. In older cabins, families used long poles to reach through loft windows and knock snow down before it grew dangerous. You pick up the pole from earlier and carry it toward the ladder. The climb is slower this time, the pole awkward in your hands. When you reach the loft and push open the small shutter, a blast of cold air strikes your face. You squint into the swirling white. Snow piles nearly halfway up the roof's lower slope. You extend the pole cautiously and push. The packed snow gives way with a soft, muffled thud, sliding down into darkness below. You repeat the motion, clearing section after section until the weight lessens. You shut the loft window and climb down, letting the warmth of the hearth reclaim you. As you step toward the fire, your eye catches something near the door. A faint line of snow sneaks under the threshold, forming a cold little ridge across the floor. You kneel, lift the rug, and find the source. The door has shifted in its frame, likely swollen unevenly from moisture and the storm's relentless pounding. You tug the door firmly into place and wedge a piece of folded cloth into the gap. The air still seeps through, but gentler now, more like a cool sigh than a cutting draft. The cabin quiets for a moment. You stand in the center of the room, listening. The storm still rages outside, but inside you feel the structure stabilize, breathing with you again. You walk slowly around the room, checking one wall, then another. The little repairs you've made hold fast. A lingering point discussed among frontier scholars returns to your mind. Some researchers argue that these constant nighttime repairs were routine, almost ritualistic, part of the rhythm of winter life. Others insist they occurred only during severe storms, when the cabin was pushed to its limit. Standing here now, feeling the timbers tremble and settle, you suspect both ideas hold truth, depending on the family, the land, and the year. You return to the hearth. The fire burns brighter now, fed by the steadier airflow. You sit on the stool, letting your hands warm slowly. The tools rest in their corner. The patched walls hold back the cold. The roof above you sighs but remains firm. You exhale deeply. Repairs are done for now. The cabin holds, and because it holds, so do you. You sit quietly for a moment, letting the fire's warmth seep back into your hands after the repairs. The cabin breathes around you. Its night sounds familiar now, but beneath all the creaks and sighs, you start to notice something else. A faint thump, then a soft scritch, then a distant, drawn-out howl that travels across the storm like a shiver running through the world itself. You lift your head, listening. Nighttime wildlife is awake, even in a storm like this. You stand and step toward the window. The horn pane trembles with each gust, and the whiteness outside swirls in hypnotic patterns. You press your palm to the surface, feeling the cold bite instantly. The snow dances across the clearing, and somewhere beyond the trees, another howl rises. Longer this time. Sharper. Wolves. Frontier settlers wrote about hearing wolves most clearly during storms, when the wind carried sound farther, and the darkness thickened around cabins like a living thing. You move closer to the wall, listening to the strange harmony between the storm's voice and the distant calls. The sound makes the hair on your arms lift, even though you know the wolves are far away. You remember reading that wolves rarely approached cabins directly. They hunted along tree lines, following the scent of deer or smaller prey. But their cries reached families at night and became part of the frontier soundscape, sometimes feared, sometimes simply accepted as another element of wilderness. You walk toward the door, curiosity pulling you. A gentle tapping sound emerges again, softer than before. You crouch and place your palm near the threshold. Something brushes the outer logs. Maybe a branch, maybe the shifting weight of snow, or maybe a wandering creature testing the structure for warmth. A small one, perhaps. Rabbits and foxes often sought shelter from storms by pressing close to cabins, hoping the human-built walls would break the wind's force. One settler noted finding tiny paw prints circling his cabin after every blizzard. You rise and move slowly back toward the hearth, but another sound stops you. A brief flutter near the roof, followed by the softest of thuds. You tilt your head. Birds sometimes perched under eaves during storms, especially small ones driven from their nests by wind. Frontier families occasionally woke to find a snow-dusted sparrow huddled against the cabin, barely breathing, refusing to move until daylight warmed the world enough to fly again. You step onto the ladder and climb a few rungs to listen closer. The sound repeats, a quick flutter, then silence. You picture a small bird tucked up there on a beam just outside, feathers puffed, eyes half closed, trusting the cabin's presence to shield it from the elements. You remain still, not wanting to startle it. Descending again, you return to the fire. The logs shift, sending a shower of tiny sparks upward. You watch them rise and fade before your gaze drifts toward the far wall. The fire's glow dances across the logs, highlighting thin lines carved by time. Suddenly, a soft scurrying noise travels behind the lower wall. You tense instinctively. Mice. They were an inevitable part of frontier living. They squeezed through the smallest cracks, drawn by warmth, by crumbs, by the scent of stored grain. You move toward the sound and crouch near the wall. You catch the faintest vibration under your fingertips, followed by a quick, scrabbling retreat. You smile softly. Mice were both nuisance and neighbor. Families trapped them, chased them off, stuffed holes to keep them out. Yet they also tolerated them at times because mice were tenacious winter survivors. A few old letters mention children secretly feeding them crumbs during storms, fascinated by their tiny resilience. A sudden crack echoes from outside, sharp and clear. You straighten, the sound ringing in your chest before fading into the storm's roar. A tree branch giving way under snow, or something larger moving through the forest. You hold your breath and strain to hear. Another crack follows, softer this time, then a heavy thud of snow shifting, likely the wind breaking old wood somewhere near the clearing. But on nights like this, every noise carries a deeper edge. You return to the center of the room and listen again. The cabin feels like a drum, transmitting the outside world through its walls. A subtle mixture of sounds filters in, the distant howls, the scratching of tiny paws, the flutter of wings, the creaking of trees bending in the storm. Settlers often described these nights as the moments when wilderness reminded them it was always watching. A curious bit of folklore rises in your memory. Some families believed certain nighttime animal calls warned of approaching storms, illness, or misfortune. An owl hooting close to a cabin was sometimes thought to predict trouble, while a fox's cry was seen as a sign of shifting weather. You listen carefully now, half expecting to hear the slow, haunting notes of an owl drifting through the dark. Instead, only the wind answers. You walk back to the window and lean close. Snow whips against the pane in frantic bursts. Then, almost hidden beneath the storm, you hear a faint bark. Quick, sharp. A fox, perhaps, weaving its way through the drifts in search of shelter or food. The sound appears once, maybe twice, then disappears altogether. You let out a slow breath. Even the smallest animals endure these nights with remarkable determination. You turn from the window and sit on the edge of the bed. Your blanket pools around your waist. The fire casts shadows that stretch and fold along the walls, almost moving like the creatures outside. You imagine a family lying awake decades ago, listening to these same sounds, trying to decipher which noises meant danger and which meant the simple persistence of life beyond their walls. You shift, letting the mattress creak beneath you. The animal sounds begin to layer themselves in your mind. The mournful howl of wolves, the sharp bark of a fox, the rustle of small paws, the fluttering wings under the eaves. They all blend into a strange, wild lullaby, one that frontier sleepers accepted as part of nightly existence. There is ongoing debate among researchers about how frightening these animals truly were to settlers. Some argue that pioneers saw them as constant threats, especially wolves that occasionally approached livestock. Others believe families grew accustomed to the wildlife, recognizing that most creatures avoided cabins during storms. From your place here beside the fire, listening to the distant calls, you suspect the truth lay somewhere in between. You lie back slowly, letting your head rest on the scratchy pillow. The storm hums outside. Something scratches faintly near the base of the wall, then falls silent. A creature settles under the eaves, rustling feathers. A wolf calls again from deep in the woods, its voice drawn out like a ribbon pulled through the night. The sounds do not frighten you now. They wrap around the cabin like another layer of presence, reminding you that even in the coldest storms, life continues just beyond the glow of the fire. You close your eyes, letting that wild chorus drift through you, steady and ancient. You lie there for a long moment, listening to the wild chorus fade into the deeper hush that settles just before dawn. The storm softens its voice, trading its furious roars for slow, heavy sighs that brush along the cabin walls. You feel the subtle change in the air before you even open your eyes fully. The night is loosening its grip. The storm is still present, but it has grown tired. Morning is approaching, even if the world outside remains swallowed in snow. You push yourself upright and draw the blanket tighter around your shoulders. The fire has burned down to a bed of glowing coals, each ember pulsing like a heartbeat beneath the grey ash. You crouch beside it, warming your hands. The air above the hearth is still warm, but everywhere else the cabin feels colder, as if the darkness has drained the last scraps of heat from the walls. You stand and move toward the door. Your boots crunch softly against a dusting of snow that has crept under the frame. You tuck the blanket around your waist and lean close, listening. On the other side, there is only silence. Not the swirling chaos of the storm, not the wails of wind finding its way through the trees, but a deep, heavy, quiet. Snowbound mornings carried a kind of stillness that frontier settlers often described as unnerving, too quiet, too still, too thick, as if the world were wrapped in cotton. You lift the latch with careful fingers. The wooden door resists, stuck against something heavy outside. You push harder, feeling the weight give only slightly. You brace your shoulder against the door and lean your full weight into it. The snow packed against the cabin sighs and shifts. After a long, slow moment, the door cracks open just enough for a sliver of pale light to spill inside. Cold air surges through the gap, cutting across your skin like a blade. You wince, but lean closer, peering out into the dimness. The world has turned into a deep, untouched expanse of white. Snowdrifts rise in gentle curves all around the cabin, some nearly as high as the windows. The trees stand bowed under heavy blankets of frost. The sky hangs low, grey and muted, offering only a hint of dawn. You shut the door again before too much cold slips inside. Your hands throb from the brief exposure. Frontier families woke to scenes like this countless times each winter. Entire doorways buried, windows blocked, roofs sagging beneath new weight. Some mornings required hours of digging before stepping outside. You turn from the door and walk to the window, wiping frost from the horn pane. The pale glow outside illuminates swirling patterns of frozen condensation across the pane. You press your thumb against it, leaving a small, clear patch. You breathe deeply and catch the familiar blend of scents inside the cabin. Wood smoke, cooling embers, wool blankets, faint animal musk from the stall. Morning scents on the frontier always carried traces of the night that came before. You listen carefully and notice the softest movement behind the partition where the livestock rests. A slow exhale, a shifting hoof. The animals have weathered the storm too. You step toward the hearth and begin coaxing the fire back to life. You add a piece of wood, then another, letting the sparks leap gently upward. You blow softly across the embers. They glow brighter, then flare into a modest flame. The warmth returns to the air inch by inch. You feel it settle across your knuckles, your cheeks, your chest. Frontier mornings always began with the fire. Once the flames gain strength, you rise and stretch your arms. The cabin feels cramped but safe, its walls still strong despite the storm's testing. A small smile crosses your face as you sense the familiar relief that settlers must have felt. The long night survived, the roof still above them, the fire warming their bones. You walk toward the trundle bed and slide it out halfway, checking if any snow or drafts found their way in during the night. The bedding is cold, but dry. You smooth the little blanket and tuck it neatly along the edges, imagining a child waking here with sleepy eyes, pulling the blanket tight before daring to leave its warmth. You cross the room to the loft ladder and climb a few rungs. The loft carries more morning chill than the main room. Frost clings to the beams like intricate lace. You brush some of it with your fingers, feeling it crumble and melt instantly. The loft window is covered completely by snow, making the space dimmer than usual. You drop back down to the main level, your breath forming slow clouds that drift toward the ceiling. A curious practice described in some early letters comes to mind. Families sometimes tapped the walls gently in the morning to test how deeply the snow had settled around the cabin. A hollow sound meant space remained. A muted thud meant digging would be needed. You try it now, touching the wall with your knuckles. The sound is soft, almost muffled. You nod to yourself. Snow has embraced the cabin tightly. A question still discussed among frontier scholars returns to your thoughts. How long could a family remain snowbound before it became dangerous? Some suggested that being trapped for a day or two was common and manageable. Others argued that extended snowbound periods created serious risks. Dwindling fuel, stale air, isolation. Without clear records from every region, the answer remains uncertain. You walk back toward the door and push it open again, just enough to glimpse the world outside. The snow is everywhere, unbroken and untouched. It almost seems to glow with its own faint light. You imagine stepping out into that white silence, boots sinking deep with every step, breath forming clouds in front of your face. But for now, you close the door gently and turn toward the hearth. The fire is growing stronger, its warmth reaching farther across the room. You sit beside it, pulling your blanket around your shoulders, letting the morning cold retreat. A snowbound morning is quiet, but not lifeless. It carries the promise of work to come, digging out the door, checking the roof, tending to animals, gathering firewood. But in this early moment, before the chores claim your energy, there is only the hush of snow, the familiar groan of the cabin, and the steady rise of warm air from the fire. You breathe deeply, letting the heat settle across your chilled skin. The storm has passed, morning has arrived, and the long night has left its mark on the world, shaping the frontier landscape into a place both peaceful and formidable. You lean back, listening to the slow burn of the fire, feeling the rhythm of a snowbound day beginning around you. You remain seated by the fire for several minutes, letting your breath fall into a calm, steady rhythm while the flames gain strength. The faint morning light outside remains muted behind the drifts, but inside the cabin the glow from the hearth slowly softens the shadows. You draw your blanket closer and let your thoughts drift toward something less visible than snow, less tangible than cold, the emotional world of the pioneers. The private thoughts they carried into nights like the one you just survived, and the resilience that helped them rise each morning to face whatever waited beyond the cabin walls. You stand, stretching your back, feeling the familiar ache of a long winter night. The hush in the room is deeper than before, a kind of post-storm, quiet, almost sacred in its stillness. You move toward the window and wipe the frost from the pane once more. The world outside remains blurred and white, but even in the dimness you can sense the shift from threat to aftermath. For many settlers, this was the moment when courage had to gather itself again. You turn from the window and walk slowly across the cabin. Your feet brush over the straw bits scattered on the floor, remnants of last night's repairs. You pause near the wall where you patch the cracks. The new chinking holds firm. You rest your palm against the log and feel its cold, steady heartbeat. Winter storms did not simply test wood or stone. They tested nerves, spirits, patience. You feel a faint echo of that test still humming in the cabin air. You sit on the edge of the bed and let the blanket fall loosely across your lap. Many frontier families wrote that the time just after a storm was often the hardest emotionally. Everyone was stiff from odd sleeping positions, tense from listening through the night, and unsure of what damage the dawn would reveal. Even children sensed it. The quiet that followed a storm sometimes felt heavier than the storm itself. You smooth the blanket with your hand and breathe deeply. A warm ember scent lingers across the fabric. In some old accounts, frontier parents described gathering their children close on mornings like these, speaking softly to dispel the leftover tension from a restless night. They reassured them that snow was only snow, that the wind was only wind, that no harm had come. You imagine such a moment in this cabin. A parent kneeling, brushing hair from a sleepy face, smiling gently despite exhaustion. You stand again and walk toward the hearth. The flames brighten as you stir the logs, and the firelight paints warm patches across your skin. You close your eyes for a moment. Emotional resilience was not simply about bravery. It was about steadiness, about returning to tasks even when fear lingered like a cold shadow. You place another log on the fire and watch it settle into the coals with a slow hiss. You return to the table and pour a little warm water into a cup, cradling it in your hands. The warmth travels up your arms and settles in your chest. This small ritual feels grounding. Many settlers wrote about the comfort of mundane tasks on winter mornings. Sweeping the floor, stirring the coals, folding blankets. These motions brought the mind back to the present, helping it release the anxieties of the night. You sip the warm water and walk toward the livestock stall. The animal inside exhales slowly, its breath puffing through the gaps in thick, sleepy clouds. Its presence feels steady, grounding. Settlers often said that caring for animals gave them emotional structure during harsh winters, something to protect, something that depended on them. You run your hand along the wooden partition and feel the warmth radiating through the boards, a small, quiet reassurance. You return to the center of the room and take in the familiar surroundings, the cracked walls, the patched seams, the rough blankets, the simple tools. Everything here was shaped by effort and necessity. Yet each object also held psychological weight. A repaired roof meant safety. A working hearth meant control. Even the smallest improvement could lift a family's spirits after a long night. You walk toward the loft ladder and touch the rung lightly. You picture someone climbing this ladder in the calm after a storm, checking on stored goods, making sure nothing had spoiled or collapsed. That small act of responsibility carried an emotional rhythm, one step after another, one task after another. The mind settled when the body moved. A curious memory returns to you from a letter written by a frontier daughter. She described how her mother always hummed softly while preparing breakfast after a bitter storm. Even when food was scarce, the humming, she said, made the cabin feel warmer. You listen now, imagining that faint music threading through the beams. You can almost feel how such quiet sounds would steady a person's spirit, giving the mind something to hold on to. You sit on the stool beside the hearth and close your eyes again. Deep inside you sense what many historians note. Emotional endurance on the frontier was not built on dramatic displays of courage. It grew from quiet persistence, from the ability to face discomfort daily, from the knowledge that fear could be present but not in control. Some researchers suggest that winter life forced settlers into a kind of seasonal mindfulness long before the term existed. Living fully in each moment was not philosophy, it was survival. You rise once more and move slowly around the room, observing each familiar space with new softness. The bed looks welcoming again. The window glows faintly with morning light. The fire crackles with promise. The cabin itself seems to exhale, as though grateful that the storm has passed. You kneel by the trundle bed again. The patched blanket rests where you smoothed it earlier. You press your hand gently into the mattress. The straw inside rustles quietly. Children might wake soon, eager to know whether the storm had changed the world outside. You imagine their excitement mingling with your own quiet relief. After a long night, even the smallest sign of daylight felt like a blessing. You stand and step toward the door again, placing your palm lightly against the wood. It is cold but steady. You imagine opening it fully later, stepping out into knee-deep snow, feeling the weight of the world pressing gently against your boots. The first steps into the morning always carried emotional meaning. A moment to acknowledge endurance, a moment to reclaim routine. You walk back to the fire and sit again, letting the warmth wrap around you. The room brightens slowly as dawn lifts behind the thick clouds. Your breathing grows quiet. The weight of the night begins to drift away. The pioneers found resilience in these quiet moments, in this subtle transition between darkness and morning, not by overpowering their fears, but by moving through them gently, by rising again, by tending the fire, by checking the walls, by holding close to the rhythms of daily life. You let your eyes soften as the flames sway in gentle waves. The storm has ended, the cabin holds steady, and your spirit, like the settlers before you, begins to settle into the calm that follows the long winter night. You draw a slow, steady breath, letting the warmth of the fire soften the chill that lingers in the cabin's corners. The glow stretches farther now, reaching the edges of the room where shadows were thickest just hours ago. As your eyes adjust, your thoughts drift towards something deeper than this single storm, something woven across the entire frontier. Not every cabin was the same. Not every family slept the same way. The way pioneers endured a winter night depended heavily on where they lived and how their region shaped their habits. You push yourself upright and walk toward the window, brushing frost from the pane with your knuckles. Outside, the snowbound world lies still and silent. But in other regions, winter nights were different. You imagine yourself standing in a northern settlement, where snowstorms were heavier, colder, and far more constant. Frontier accounts describe families in those northern forests building thicker cabins, cutting logs with tighter fits, and lining their interiors with extra layers of bark to guard against the intense cold. You run your fingers along your own cabin wall and sense how thin it would have felt in those harsher places. You step back and move toward the hearth. The fire burns brightly now, and you feel a deep wave of gratitude for its warmth. You crouch, watching embers shift and brighten, thinking of how families in the northern Great Lakes region often kept fires burning almost continuously through winter. Historical writings note that their chimneys were built wider and taller, able to release more smoke and heat without smoking up the room. You lift the poker and stir the coals gently, imagining the broad stone hearths described in journals from those northern homesteads, some large enough to cook and heat an entire room with a single well-tended blaze. You rise and cross the room toward the door. The draft slipping beneath it feels faint now, almost apologetic. You press your palm to the wood and imagine the prairie settlers farther west. Their storms were different. Fiercer winds, flatter land, no forests to break the gusts. Prairie cabins were often dug partly into the ground or built with thick sod walls. Those homes offered insulation the forests could not provide. You imagine sleeping under a sod roof, the weight of earth above you muffling the storm's voice, the temperature inside more stable, but the darkness deeper. You walk toward the corner of the cabin, where the livestock stall rests. The animal inside shifts softly, releasing a warm breath that seeps faintly through the boards. Families on the Great Plains often built shared shelters for livestock, connecting barns and cabins with narrow passageways so they could check on animals without stepping into the storm. You rest your hand on the partition and picture a sprawling sod house, holding both humans and animals under one long, low roof, the combined warmth creating a steady microclimate inside. You step toward the loft ladder and place your foot on the first rung. The loft above holds its thin crust of frost. Frontier families in the Appalachian Mountains often built larger lofts, sometimes covering most of the cabin's footprint, because the steep terrain and heavy forest offered abundant timber for roomy structures. Journals mention that those lofts stayed warmer due to tightly stacked logs and smaller gaps in the walls. You run your hand along the rung, feeling the grain, imagining those mountain cabins where children curled up under thick quilts while snow fell endlessly through the valleys. You climb a few rungs and pause halfway up the ladder. The air here holds a faint coldness, a lingering reminder of the storm. You picture the warmer lofts in the southern Appalachians, where winters were milder but still unpredictable. Families there sometimes slept without a fire altogether, relying on quilts stitched generations deep and thick feather beds passed down across families. You close your eyes and imagine the scent of those old quilts, the feel of mountain air drifting through narrow windows. You step down again, letting your feet find the warm floor near the hearth. A curious observation from a 19th century traveler flashes through your thoughts. Cabins in the Ohio Valley sometimes had small sleeping alcoves built directly into the walls, snug compartments that trapped heat and shielded sleepers from drafts. You glance around your own cabin, imagining such an alcove filled with patched blankets and maybe a straw mattress that hugged the back wall so tightly that cold air could not find its way in. You walk toward the table and rest your hand gently on its edge. The wood feels smooth from years of use. Families in eastern settlements often slept in rooms above their cooking spaces, the heat rising through floorboards made from thin planks. Not so in the frontier beyond. Here, everything happened in one room. Eating, working, sleeping, repairing, surviving. But in the eastern mountains, you might have climbed to a slightly warmer loft through a trapdoor, the heat rising through your floor as you settled in to sleep. You return to the hearth, kneeling close as the fire flares. Sparks crackle in the air. You feel their warmth on your cheeks. You cannot help but think of the settlers in far northern territories who slept with heated stones wrapped in cloth placed beneath their blankets. A practice so practical, yet so region-specific. In warmer areas it would have been unnecessary. In colder regions it was life-saving. You rise again and sweep your gaze around the room. Every region shaped its sleepers differently. The Great Lakes demanded thicker walls. The Appalachians offered timber for lofts and quilts. The prairies required sod and earth shelters. The far northern settlements needed constant fire and communal warmth. The cabin you stand in feels like a thread connecting all these landscapes. You breathe deeply and let this understanding settle into your bones. A lingering question still discussed among researchers crosses your mind. Did these regional differences create distinct winter cultures? Or did pioneers share similar habits regardless of location? Evidence seems mixed. Some patterns repeated everywhere. Fires tended through the night, shared beds, improvised repairs, while others varied greatly depending on climate, materials, and community traditions. You sit back on the stool beside the fire, warming your hands. The cabin's scent wraps around you. Smoke, wool, cold timber. You can almost feel the presence of settlers from distant regions woven into the story of this room. Their winters were different, but their need for warmth, safety, and resilience was the same. You lean forward, elbows on your knees, letting the fire's glow settle into your eyes. The storm has calmed. The world outside waits quietly beneath its blanket of snow, and in this small cabin, you carry the echo of countless winter nights from across the frontier. You shift a little closer to the fire, letting its warmth sink deeper into your bones as the morning light grows slightly brighter beyond the snow. The air inside the cabin feels steadier now, no longer trembling with the storm's force. In this calmer moment, your mind drifts toward the blend of cultures that shaped frontier sleeping habits. This cabin, simple as it looks, is part of a much larger tapestry woven from many traditions carried across oceans, across forests, and across generations. You rise from the stool and wander toward the table where the herbs hang above your head. Their faint smell swirls gently with each draft. You run your fingers lightly across a dried sage bundle, and as you touch it, a memory from an old account comes to mind. Settlers learning from indigenous neighbors to burn certain plants for cleansing or calming the air. The practice sometimes filtered quietly into nighttime routines, especially during long winters when smoky cabins needed a sense of peace as much as warmth. You stand for a moment beneath the rafters, letting the scent linger. Many frontier customs were not invented in isolation. Families borrowed ideas from those who knew the land better than they did. You picture indigenous families sleeping on fir boughs layered beneath hides, a method that insulated from the cold ground and released a clean, resinous smell. Some European settlers adopted similar techniques, weaving pine boughs beneath their straw mattresses to help trap warmth. You glance at your own bedding and imagine the ghost of pine scent rising faintly into the winter night. You move toward the window and rest your palm against the cold surface. Light gathers slowly across the snow outside. In your mind, you see immigrants from Scandinavia settling in northern regions, bringing with them traditions of shared sleeping platforms, thick feather bedding, and nighttime routines built around reducing heat loss. Their knowledge of surviving long winters helped countless families adapt to conditions far harsher than what they once knew in Europe. You step back from the window and walk toward the bed. The wool blanket draped across it scratches your knuckles as you smooth its surface. Families of German or Dutch heritage often brought spinning and weaving traditions across the Atlantic, creating tightly woven blankets prized for their warmth. These heavy, durable textiles became winter lifelines in cabins from Pennsylvania to the Midwest. You lift the edge of the blanket and feel its weight with new appreciation, imagining the long hours of labor that went into each stitch. You lower the blanket again and cross the room toward the loft ladder. Your hand finds the rung easily now. You place your foot on the first step, but do not climb yet. Instead, you picture how sleeping arrangements differed among cultures. Some French settlements practiced mat-style sleeping closer to the floor, layering fur, straw, and cloth in soft piles. Some Scottish families brought rope bed designs to the frontier, tightening hemp cords beneath mattresses to create firmer support. These influences mingled in cabins all across early America, creating hybrids of comfort and practicality. You climb halfway into the loft, just enough to feel the cooler air above. You rest your hand on the low beam, feeling its frost. Nearby, a bundle of cloth lies folded neatly in a corner. You touch the bundle and imagine how indigenous teachings influenced settlers beyond bedding. Stories passed along described using heated stones wrapped in hides, not just for warmth, but to ease sore muscles after long days of labor. That small act of care worked its way into frontier sleep practices, becoming a shared trick known across cultures. You descend the ladder slowly and return to the hearth. The fire crackles with renewed confidence. You sit on the stool and watch it, your thoughts drifting toward the African traditions carried quietly by enslaved people and their descendants, even in regions far from cotton plantations. Oral histories mention techniques for layering blankets strategically to trap heat efficiently, and methods of tucking cloth around the body to prevent drafts during sleep. These skills often flowed into frontier life through shared work and whispered exchanges, shaping the warmth that families relied on each winter. You lift a cup from the table and hold it near your face, letting the rising steam warm your nose. You sip slowly, feeling the heat travel down your throat. You imagine families of mixed cultural backgrounds sharing warm evening drinks, steeped with herbs, roots, or spices carried from distant homelands, each blend offering not just heat, but a memory of another place, another tradition. You return your gaze to the fire. Its glow reflects along the walls, touching tools, blankets, and bedding with soft golden light. These simple objects now feel like echoes of many hands and many histories. You imagine children of mixed heritage growing up in cabins like this, inheriting a patchwork of winter wisdom. Some nights they might sleep beneath quilts stitched with European patterns, next to a mattress lined with moss taught by indigenous neighbors, warmed by stones heated using African methods of fire tending. A point still discussed among historians crosses your mind. Which cultural traditions dominated frontier sleeping habits? Some argue that European influence overshadowed everything else. Others insist frontier life was more fluid and blended than many records reveal. Standing here in the hush of morning, surrounded by quiet traces of many worlds, the blended version feels truer. You walk toward the door again and lay your palm against it. The wood radiates a cold steadiness that mirrors the world outside. You close your eyes briefly, picturing families from distant lands huddled around their own hearths, quietly folding their traditions into new surroundings. Every winter night became a meeting place of ideas. Each small habit passed through stories, gestures, and daily practice. You return to the hearth, sit on the stool, and wrap the blanket around your shoulders. The crackling fire sends soft warmth through your chest. The cabin feels richer now, fuller, shaped by more voices than the storm alone. You breathe slowly, letting the warmth settle deeper. In this frontier cabin, you sleep not only with fire and blankets, but with the echoes of many cultures layered into every corner. The night holds more than cold. It holds history itself, woven into the quiet. You lift your head again, feeling a small spark of curiosity rise as your eyes drift toward the corner where the tools and blankets rest. The storm has eased, but the cold still curls around your ankles like a persistent visitor. You stand slowly and walk toward the hearth, stretching your hands out to the flames. Their warmth reminds you of something practical and deeply human. The countless clever little tricks pioneers used to make winter nights bearable, not grand inventions, not elaborate systems, just small, ingenious tools of comfort that filled the long hours with a sense of possibility. You kneel beside the hearth and lift a stone that has been warming near the edge of the fire. Its surface is hot, almost too hot to handle without the thick wool cloth you wrap around your palm. You turn it slowly, feeling the heat radiate through the fabric. Settlers often heated stones like this to tuck beneath blankets or place near their feet at bedtime. Historical journals note that the stones retained warmth surprisingly well, sometimes long enough to ease the harshest chill for an hour or more. You wrap it carefully in cloth and imagine placing it at the foot of the bed, letting the heat travel up through stiff toes and tired muscles. You carry the stone toward the bed and set it gently near the blankets. The warmth spreads instantly into the air around it. You pause and imagine a family preparing for sleep, each person claiming their own stone or heated brick, competing playfully for the warmest one. The little ritual becomes easy to picture. Excited whispers, quickly wrapped stones, a scramble to tuck them between cold sheets before the heat escaped. You turn next toward the low wooden shelf, where a small metal pan rests. Its handle is smooth from years of use. You lift it and smile softly. Bed warmers. Simple, shallow pans filled with glowing embers, swept across the mattress to chase out the cold before climbing in. These were carried from Europe to the frontier by families who refused to let go of old comforts. You open the lid and imagine slipping a few embers inside, then sweeping the pan gently across the straw mattress, leaving behind a trail of fleeting warmth. The idea feels both practical and strangely tender. You set the pan down and unfold a thick wool cloth that lies beside it. The fabric is worn in places, but the weave remains strong. Cloth like this was often used to wrap heated objects or to plug drafts that grew too stubborn during the night. You press the cloth to your cheek and feel its rough texture. Some families, especially those living in colder northern regions, kept spare cloths specifically for warming feet and hands. Children often went to sleep with their feet wrapped snugly in wool strips to stop the cold from sneaking up their legs. You stand again and walk toward the table where the herbs hang. Beneath them sits a small metal mug filled with warm water warming beside the fire. You lift it and sip. The water is plain, but the warmth it brings is immediate and soothing. A curious detail returns to you from a settler's letter. Families sometimes placed warm drinks beside beds for those who woke cold in the middle of the night. Not tea, necessarily sometimes just warm water or broth. They believed it rekindled inner heat and eased the mind enough to fall back asleep. You sip again and let the warmth settle in your chest. You place the mug back and notice a folded cloth bag near the corner of the table. Inside could be warm sand or ashes, familiar materials to early homesteaders. Some people heated sand gently in small pots and scooped it into cloth bags to create primitive heating pads. The warmth lasted longer than stones, and the bag could be placed anywhere on the body. You imagine a weary settler pressing such a bundle against an aching back or sore shoulder, sighing with relief. You step toward the stall where the animal rests. The air grows warmer near the partition, proof of the comfort gained simply from sharing space with another living creature. Some families used sheepskins or calf hides as sleeping layers because they trapped heat more effectively than woven blankets. You lift a folded hide from a nearby hook. Its surface is soft, thick, and faintly scented with the outdoors. You drape it over your shoulders and instantly feel warmth gather across your skin. Such hides were often placed directly beneath sleepers, creating a barrier between their bodies and the cold straw beneath. You walk slowly across the room, letting the hide settle around your back like a cloak. The firelight brushes across its surface, bringing out its deep texture. You stand near the window where the draft nudges your ankles and press the hide around you more firmly, feeling how well it deflects the cold. You picture frontier families layering hides beneath quilts, stacking warmth like a fortress against the night. You turn and walk toward the hearth again, noticing a small wooden box near the edge of the table. Inside lies a handful of smooth pebbles, not for decoration, not for play. In a few regions, families used small warmed stones to place in mittens or pockets during nighttime chores, especially when stepping outside briefly. These tiny stones acted like personal warmth tokens, ready to help bare hands survive even a few moments in the icy air. You roll one between your fingers and imagine slipping it into a child's mitten before they fetch water or check on animals. You kneel again by the fire, captivated by the ingenuity of these small comforts. None of them eliminate the cold entirely. None make winter easy, but each one softens the sharp edge of the night, creating pockets of relief scattered through the storm. You sit on the stool and take in the cabin again with fresh eyes. The tools, the hides, the stones, the pan, The cloths, all simple objects, yet each one carries the echo of long winter nights. Cleverness born not from luxury, but from necessity. You feel a quiet admiration settle into your chest. A question often discussed among historians comes to mind. Which of these tools was most widely used across frontier regions? Some argue the heated stones were nearly universal. Others claim the bed warmers travelled furthest across cultural lines. Evidence remains fragmentary, scattered across letters and artifact collections, but it is clear that comfort on the frontier was crafted by human hands, one warm idea at a time. You lift the warmed stone from the bed and hold it close. Its heat is fading now, but still present. A small reminder that even in the fiercest winters, people found ways to protect themselves through creativity and determination. You place the stone gently on the hearth and draw your blanket closer. As you settle back onto the bed, you feel the layered warmth around you in a new way, woven from fire, from stone, from hide, from history. Small comforts, quiet tools, a fortress of warmth built from the simplest things. You settle deeper into the wool blanket, feeling its weight calm your breath as the fire shifts behind you in a soft glow. The morning has grown brighter, but winter brightness is never warm. It's a pale, distant kind of light that slips into cabins without offering much comfort. As it spreads across the rough wooden floorboards, your thoughts drift towards something that lingered behind every quiet winter night on the frontier: illness. Not the dramatic, sudden kind, but the creeping, subtle kinds that worried families through the long months when cold and confinement pressed close. You rise slowly from the bed and walk toward the window, rubbing sleep from your eyes. The frost on the pane forms delicate, branching shapes that look almost like feathers. You press your knuckles against the surface, feeling the chill slide instantly into your skin. It reminds you of a common winter fear among settlers, waking up chilled too deeply. A cold breath meant more than discomfort, it meant risk. Many families believed that sleeping in extremely cold, drafty conditions invited lung ailments, sore joints, or persistent winter fevers. You step back from the window, watching your breath form a smooth cloud in the air. Frontier notes mention that cabins often smelled of sickness during winter, simply because families had nowhere else to go. When one person fell ill, everyone shared the same confined air. You inhale slowly, thinking of how this very room might have held countless coughs, countless whispered worries about whether a simple chill might deepen into something far more dangerous. You move toward the hearth and place another piece of wood on the fire. The flames brighten, their warmth flowing outward. You kneel and hold your hands close. Many settlers believed that warming the body before bed was essential not just for comfort but for health. They knew nothing of germs in the modern sense, but they noticed patterns. A warm sleeper woke healthier, a cold sleeper woke weaker. You flatten your palms toward the glow and feel the prickling sensations spread across your fingertips. You rise and walk toward the table where the small bundles of herbs hang. You lift one, rubbing the leaves gently between your fingers. The scent rises immediately, earthy and comforting. Some families brewed herbal mixes to soothe winter ailments, even if they didn't fully understand the causes behind them. A few settlers believed that sage or mint in evening teas kept away winter chills, or eased sore throats that crept in during long, smoky nights. You close your eyes, imagining a parent steeping herbs in a small pot, hoping the steam alone would offer some measure of protection. You set the bundle down and trace the rim of a wooden bowl on the table. Inside are remnants of dried berries. A few journals from northern settlements mention that people used dried berries rich in vitamin-like properties without knowing exactly why they worked. They simply observed that children who drank berry teas stayed healthier. You lift one shriveled berry to your nose, inhaling its faint sweetness, imagining it boiling in a pot at dusk, while snow hammered against the walls. You turn toward the livestock stall. The animal inside shifts again, its breath rising through the gaps in slow puffs. Families watched their livestock closely in winter since illnesses among animals could spread quickly in small shelters. A strange but true detail returns to you from a Midwestern family's letters. They believed that listening to the animals breathing at night helped them predict who in the family might fall ill next. If the horse or cow wheezed, they feared human illness would soon follow. You rest your hand on the partition now, sensing the steady rhythm on the other side. You step away from the stall and walk toward the door. A thin draft grazes your ankles. You curl your toes instinctively, remembering how many settlers considered cold feet a warning sign. Children often went to bed wearing multiple layers of socks, and parents scolded them for shaking off blankets during the night. You tuck the blanket around your waist and breathe deeply, feeling the protective instinct settle into your thoughts. You return to the fire, where the warmth lifts the tension from your shoulders. You crouch lower, watching the coals pulse. A familiar question discussed by researchers surfaces in your mind. How much did cabin smoke contribute to winter illnesses? Some scholars argue that poor ventilation and constant smoke weakened lungs over time, especially in tightly sealed cabins. Others believe that drafts balanced the smoke enough that only severe storms caused dangerous buildup. You run your hand along the hearthstone, feeling its warmth, imagining the countless nights when families debated whether to seal a draft or let the smoke sting their eyes a little longer. You stand and walk slowly toward the bed again. You pull the blanket back and sit, letting the straw mattress rustle beneath you. The sounds of the storm have faded now, leaving only a distant hush that presses softly against the cabin walls. You smooth your hand along the blanket and think of how families guarded their bedding carefully to prevent dampness, a major winter hazard. Damp bedding led to chills, chills led to fevers, fevers led to long, anxious nights. You lie back slightly, propping yourself on your elbows. You imagine a mother feeling a child's forehead in the dim light, checking for heat or coldness, a father listening for coughing in the dark. The fear of pneumonia, unseen, unstoppable, haunted many cabins. You swallow softly, imagining the quiet prayers whispered into the smoke-filled air. You shift your gaze upward toward the rafters, where a faint thread of frost still clings. The cold in this room is real, but manageable. You know that in harsher regions, frost sometimes formed on blanket edges or on children's hair as they slept. That image lingers, stark and haunting. You sit fully upright again and breathe slowly. Despite all the fears, despite the illnesses that sometimes crept through cabins like shadows, frontier families found ways to endure. They layered warmth, they shared body heat, they crafted herbal remedies, they trusted instincts sharpened by seasons of survival. You pull the blanket closer, allowing its warmth to settle along your spine. The fire crackles, the room breathes, and you begin to understand that winter illness was not just a physical threat. It was an emotional one, a weight carried quietly through every snowstorm, shaping the rhythms of sleep and the rituals of night. Yet here you sit, safe for now, wrapped in warmth, listening to your own steady breath in the stillness of the winter morning. You ease yourself up from the bed again, feeling the stiffness in your limbs as the cold air greets your skin. The fire has settled into a steady glow, its light swaying gently across the cabin walls. Morning has fully arrived now, though the sun remains hidden behind thick layers of cloud and snow. This is the deep heart of winter, the time when nights feel longer than days, when the world seems to hold its breath for weeks at a stretch. You inhale slowly, sensing that stillness, the strange pause that frontier families called the long nights. You step toward the window. Frost has claimed most of the pain, curling into delicate, icy flowers. You rub a small patch clear with your sleeve. Beyond the glass, the landscape lies heavy and silent under deep piles of snow. The light outside is a bluish grey, the sort that makes time feel uncertain. You press your forehead lightly to the cold pane and imagine how the pioneers felt during these midwinter stretches, when day and night blended into one long span of dimness. You turn from the window and wrap a blanket around your shoulders. In frontier homes, sleep patterns often shifted during the deepest winters. Journals describe families slipping naturally into longer resting periods, waking for hours in the thick of the night, then falling asleep again before dawn. Some called it first and second sleep. Others simply accepted it as the rhythm of winter. You move toward the hearth and lower yourself onto the stool, feeling the quiet hours settle around you. You stir the fire gently, watching the sparks flutter upward. During the long nights, these sparks often became company of their own. Settlers wrote about watching embers glow while everyone else slept, listening to the cabin breathe and the storm move slowly across the land. The silence could feel peaceful or eerie, depending on the night. You reach forward, letting the heat kiss your fingers before pulling back again. You stand and take a slow walk around the cabin. The floor creaks softly beneath your feet. The trundle bed lies still, waiting for small bodies to climb into it again. The loft above seems draped in a hushed, shadowy calm. You look toward the stall partition and see the faint rise and fall of the animal's breathing. Even it seems subdued by the winter depth. You move closer, placing your hand on the partition. The warmth reminds you that all creatures adjusted their rhythms to the season, settling into slower, quieter patterns. You step back and feel a familiar thought surface. Winter chores changed too. Nights were not just for resting, they were for mending tools, patching clothes, shaping wooden handles, or carving small items by firelight. Frontier families often saved delicate tasks for the night hours, when outside work was impossible. You walk toward the small wooden table and trail your fingers along its surface, imagining it covered with thread, needles, bits of fabric, or newly carved utensils. You glance up at the rafters, where herbs still hang, brittle but fragrant. Many settlers dried plants during autumn to last them through the coldest months. These herbs became part of nighttime routines, used in teas or in small mixtures, burned to freshen stale cabin air. You lift one dried sprig and inhale its faint, comforting scent. You imagine someone sitting where you sit now, preparing a calming drink during one of those long, quiet winter watches. You return to the hearth and sit again. The flames sway in an unhurried rhythm. The cabin feels timeless in this moment, suspended in warmth and hush. A curious observation from a frontier account rises in your thoughts. Some homesteaders believed winter nights were spiritually significant because the darkness allowed deeper reflection, lending the mind a stillness impossible during the busy seasons of planting and harvest. You rest your elbows on your knees and lean forward slightly, understanding that sentiment now. You turn your head toward the door. Its sturdy frame stands firm against the remnants of the storm. For families in isolated regions, the longest nights brought stretches of loneliness that tested their emotional endurance. People often yearned for news, for visitors, for anything to break the sense of separation. At the same time, these long nights also strengthened family bonds. Children and parents talked quietly, told stories, or shared memories across the dim glow of the hearth. You imagine those soft voices filling this cabin, weaving warmth through the cold. A point of scholarly discussion comes to mind. Did winter really alter sleep patterns so dramatically for most frontier families, or were the recorded cases exceptions rather than the rule? Some researchers believe the two-phase sleep was widespread. Others argue it depended on region, climate, and cultural background. You roll this idea around gently, letting the possibilities drift through your thoughts like snowflakes. You rise again and walk back to the window. The morning light grows slightly brighter, brushing the landscape in pale silver. The thick drifts outside soften the world into a continuous surface, smooth and silent. You imagine stepping out into that hush, feeling the cold bite at your face, breaking the untouched blanket of snow with your first crunching step. That moment, the first moment outside after a long night storm, was often described by settlers as both beautiful and overwhelming. You lean your forehead against the window frame and breathe steadily. The world outside remains frozen, but inside the cabin, your breath warms the air. The fire crackles gently, the animal shifts, and the wood structure gives another small sigh. Everything feels slower, heavier, yet also deeply peaceful. You sit on the edge of the bed and pull the blanket around your shoulders once more. The mattress whispers beneath you as the straw settles. In these slow winter cycles, sleep was not a single stretch, but a series of rests, watchful pauses, small naps, and fuller slumbers. Pioneers let the rhythm of the night guide them, not the clock. You close your eyes, letting the deep quiet wrap around you. You feel the presence of the long nights settling once again, ancient and patient. Winter does not rush. Winter teaches you to move gently through darkness, to trust the fire, to listen to the cabin, to rest when rest comes. You breathe deeply and feel the weight of the season settle across your shoulders like another blanket. You rise slowly from the edge of the bed, letting the blanket fall softly around your waist as the fire gives one last sleepy crackle. The world outside remains pale and slow, but inside the cabin there is a subtle shift. The storm has passed, the night has loosened, and winter has entered a gentler, quieter stretch. You walk toward the hearth, warming your hands one final time, and prepare to settle into the soft glow that follows a storm's fury. You glance at the door, where only a faint line of snow remains under the threshold. The draft there has calmed to almost nothing. You kneel and brush the snow away, feeling how cold it is even now. That cold once pressed hard against cabins like this, threatening to slip into any weakness. But this morning, it rests like a quiet reminder of a long night survived. As you stand again, your gaze drifts across the cabin. Everything looks familiar and worn, but also softened. The repaired seams in the walls hold steady. The patched chinking shows no new cracks, The tools in the corner await the day's work. You run your finger along the handle of the axe, feeling its simple strength. It feels lighter somehow, not because the storm is gone, but because you stood with it through the night. You step toward the trundle bed and pull it out gently. The small blanket lies smooth, its bright patches glowing faintly in the morning light. You reach out and touch it, remembering the wooden figure tucked beneath the pillow. A child here would wake soon, rubbing their eyes, lifting that little carving to greet the morning. You picture their sleepy grin, the way they might scramble up onto the main bed to share warmth with the rest of the family. You return to the main bed and sit for a moment. The mattress whispers under your weight. You let your hand rest on the blanket and picture the whole family rising slowly, stretching stiff limbs, yawning, brushing hair from their eyes. Frontier mornings after storms were quiet rituals of gratitude. You survived. The cabin held. The fire lived. You exhale softly, feeling that relief echo in your chest. You walk toward the hearth again and crouch beside it. The coals glow a muted orange, ready to be fed or left to fade. You stir them lightly and watch small sparks awaken. A faint warmth wraps around your knuckles. Families once gathered here before stepping outside to face the drifts. They warmed hands, drank something hot, whispered about the thickness of the snow, the state of the roof, the safety of nearby neighbors. You lift your eyes toward the window. The frost has begun to melt, forming thin droplets that crawl slowly down the pane. The light outside is soft and silver, touching the snowdrifts with a gentle pulse. You imagine opening the door fully, stepping out into that brightness, hearing nothing but the muffled hush of deep snow. That was always the first task of morning: to look, to assess, to breathe in the cold air and judge the day ahead. You turn toward the stall. The animal shifts, snorts softly, and shakes its head. Its breath puffs through the cracks in gentle, rhythmic clouds. You place your hand on the wooden partition, feeling the familiar warmth return. The presence of animals gave comfort through storms, but they also gave purpose each morning. They needed feeding, brushing, checking. You imagine lifting a small wooden bucket, brushing frost from its handle, and stepping carefully through the snow to tend them. You step back and let your gaze settle on every part of the room: the herbs along the rafters, the hides folded near the door, the cloths stacked beside the bed, the stones warming by the fire. Each object holds a fragment of winter's story. These were the quiet, unsung elements that carried you through the coldest moments. You think of the pioneers who reached for them each night, trusting that small comforts could make a world of difference. A lingering question from scholars touches your thoughts. Did these storm nights shape frontier lives deeply, or were they simply routines repeated without much reflection? The truth feels clear now. These nights mattered. They shaped the rhythm of survival. They taught patience. They built resilience. They wove families together in warmth and whispering quiet. You sit again, slowly, letting your body rest. The fire hums in low, sleepy tones. You draw a long, steady breath and feel that quiet winter peace settle across your shoulders. The storm may have passed, but its memory lingers in every beam, every blanket, every breath of this morning. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the night fade gently, replaced by calm. The pioneers accepted nights like these not as threats, but as chapters in a long, steady journey. Snowstorms shaped their sleep, their routines, their memories, but they always emerged from them, stepping into the stillness of morning with quiet determination. You inhale deeply, letting the last chill slip away. The thaw will come, the days will lengthen, but for now, you rest in this lingering moment of winter peace, surrounded by the softened hush of a world recovering from the storm. The fire burns low now, a gentle pool of amber light flickering beneath a slow rise of smoke. You breathe in deeply, letting your shoulders soften and your breath lengthen. The storm outside has finally loosened its grip, and the cabin feels quieter with every passing moment. Even the air seems to relax, settling into the kind of calm that only arrives after a long night of wind and snow. You sit back, letting the blanket wrap around your body like a comforting embrace. The room glows with a fading warmth. Each sound grows softer, each shadow stretches a little slower. It feels as though time itself has begun to drift, moving gently around you. Your breaths grow longer, deeper, heavier. With each inhale, the last threads of cold release their hold. With each exhale, the quiet settles deeper into your bones. The fire flickers once, twice, then settles into a steady glow, Its warmth brushes your face like a soft hand. The scent of wood smoke lingers in the air, warm and familiar, turning the space around you into a cradle of slow, drifting calm. You feel the softness of the straw mattress beneath you, the steady support of the log wall at your back, and the gentle pulse of the fire guiding you toward rest. You imagine the snow outside lying in deep, untouched blankets, dimming the world in its quiet hush. Nothing moves quickly now. Not the air, not the light, not your thoughts. Everything slows, softens, eases. Let your breathing sink into that softness. Let the last hints of the storm fade from your shoulders. You are warm now, safe, resting in the quiet heart of winter, wrapped in calm. The night is over, the storm has passed, and you can drift, gently, into sleep.